Tu Thuit, the Empress of Dai Ung, had just transmigrated into another body. This body was also named Tu Thuit. This country was called Dai. A soft voice sounded by her ear, "Your Majesty, it is time for court." Since ancient times, the Daeung dynasty had honored women above all else. Women were the ones responsible for fighting, and they were also the pillars of the family. Men were in charge of bearing children and doing housework. But this dynasty she had transmigrated into seemed a little off. She began looking around in bewilderment. A dignified lady not going out to protect her family, but instead acting like a man, wearing makeup and crying so pitifully. What kind of propriety is that? And as men, how can they be showing their faces outside all day discussing court affairs? This is truly against the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. She began recalling the past. In her previous life, she had once been the first woman to seize all 6 nations in her grasp. A shout rang out through those years. "Tu Lung, I curse you to die childless and leave no descendants. In the future you will not die in peace. You will die miserably. You tyrant, still a virgin." After that, Tu Thuit went to the record keeper and scolded him. "Stop, that's not enough. Write down the words she used to curse me in the historical records. Maybe I truly trusted the wrong good person." A quack doctor stepped forward and offered her a bottle of strange medicine with exactly the effects she had been looking for. "Your Majesty, with this, you'll be able to handle 10 men at once. Then you'll be able to display your femininity in bed. What's more, it nourishes yang and supplements yin, prolongs life, preserves youth, and 10 months later, you will become the mother of 10 children." But who would have thought that before she even got to taste a single man, she died first? After being reborn into another life, I discovered that whether I was an empress or not, I still had to fulfill the duty of bearing children. Then the officials all knelt before her and reported, "Among the 3 forms of unfilial conduct, having no children is the gravest. We beg your Majesty to quickly choose an imperial consort and give birth to an heir for the nation. Please consider it, your Majesty." However, looking at the young men the officials had sent over, this wasn't my type at all. Pretty boys. The more Tu Thuit looked, the more dejected she became. She muttered, "Are you playing with me? I still want fine clothes. I still want beauty like blossoms in bloom. When the spring breeze brushes the threshold, the flowers grow even richer." But Tu Thuit still wasn't satisfied with this bunch. A talentless man is worthless. In this world, things were even stranger. Women were the ones who gave birth. Women can easily die in childbirth. They may hemorrhage. Tu Thuit felt as if her heart had died. Fear was born inside her. "I don't want to live anymore. I want to die." She immediately sprawled across the golden couch. "I'm dying here. Don't wake me up." The imperial tutor shouted anxiously through the entire hall, "Your Majesty, wake up." Until one day, the grand imperial tutor of the realm changed his temperament. The former imperial tutor used to say, "Wait until your Majesty's health improves before considering lifelong matters." But the current imperial tutor said, "Your Majesty can only belong to me." Not only did he collude with others, he also studied diligently, improving his skills. How to Seduce Her Majesty, the secret manual of 108 positions. The more Tu Thuit thought about it, the more she felt he was actually quite useful, but he not only helped me deal with memorials, he also balanced conflicts. And sometimes he was very adorable. His favorite line was, "Does your Majesty not want me anymore?" This was specially made by the imperial tutor for your Majesty, a reassuring medicine to prevent pregnancy. In the future, you can have as many children as you want, and whenever you want to give birth, you can give birth. Thinking back on her previous lives, Tu Thuit felt it was all such a waste. So in this life, she lived in indulgence and enjoyment. After living through 2 lives without ever tasting a man, it would be a pity. The moment she thought of that, Tu Thuit angrily slammed the book shut. "Imperial tutor, are you trying to monopolize me?" This was a world where women were supreme. Women were the heads of households and appeared openly in public, while men remained behind the scenes, supporting their wives and raising the children. The 3 obediences and 4 virtues. The man bound atop the city wall refused to submit. Tu Lung's laughter echoed across the entire city. She sneered, "Why should I die in the future?" Then she stepped forward, grabbed his chin, and sneered. But at that moment, Tu Lung pressed her lips together imagining it with great delight. Afterward, Tu Lung went to the record keeper and scolded him. "Stop writing. You're not allowed to record the insults she hurled at me in the history books. Now that the realm is settled, it is time to think about the great matter of my life. Make sure the historiographers erase the phrase virgin tyrant from the history of Dai. Then a servant went to the place where the young men were imprisoned and announced, by Her Majesty's decree, select 10 pure-bodied men of peerless appearance, handsome men of gentle virtue, to attend her in bed tonight. The guard could only obey. Yes. At that moment, in the palace hall, Tu Lung was angrily complaining. "State preceptor, I came to you to ask how to deal with men, and yet you gave me a fighting dummy." The male attendant standing beside her quietly whispered in her ear, "Your Majesty, this is a secret training figure. It teaches the proper skills for fighting in bed." Only then did Tu Lung understand the hidden meaning behind it. It was like a fishbone stuck in her throat, like her insides burning with impatience. The more Tu Lung looked, the more excited she became all over. So that's how it is. The maid beside her simply smiled and praised her. This immortal pill was refined through countless hardships. It restores the body, prolongs life, preserves youth, and will bring results sooner or later. The male attendant boasted softly, "I guarantee that tonight, when Your Majesty attends 10 men, you can simply go for it without any fear at all. And besides, it nourishes yang and supplements yin, prolongs life, preserves youth, and can even make you pregnant in a single try." Yet that very night, a disaster occurred. In the end, she died young. It's over. Everything is ruined. Tu Lung cried streams of tears. "My lifetime of glory, my achievements are comparable to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Yet in the histories of later generations, the title of virgin tyrant can never be washed away." It shot straight down into the great hall. Then she vanished, stunned even herself. Inside a large room, Tu Lung groggily opened her eyes. She sat up in alarm, her mind in chaos. I suddenly came back to life? Then once again she was stunned. Why is it flat in front? She decided to check for herself. At last Tu Lung let out a sigh of relief. A woman. Only then did she notice the unfamiliar man sitting by the bed. "There's someone here." The moment she saw his face, her heart fluttered. He was exactly her type. Seeing that she had awakened, he quickly gave orders below. "Someone, Her Majesty is awake. Bring everything in at once." While she still had not recovered her senses, 2 more men slowly entered carrying nourishing items. State Preceptor Lai Trong Tin held a tray bearing a golden ceremonial robe. "Your Majesty's mourning period has ended." Then came the close attendant Tang Ton. Quickly, the auspicious hour is almost here." Tu Lung had a headache from thinking and still could not understand. Auspicious hour? Imperial tutor Dan Track hurriedly took the clothes and draped the robe over her. Then the golden ornaments and grand ceremonial attire were placed upon Tu Lung. Once everything was done, Dan Track smiled faintly and said, "Your Majesty, it is time for you to ascend the throne." After being dressed up and stepping outside, Tu Lung stood out brilliantly in the entire hall. At that moment, she was still immersed in leisurely self-satisfaction. "I knew it. My merits surpass the 3 sovereigns. My virtue exceeds the 5 emperors. How could heaven possibly let me die so unjustly?" But as she passed by the main hall, she suddenly heard the sound of tearful murmuring and discussion in the corridor outside. "Late Emperor, if your spirit still watches from heaven, please protect Dai, protect the new emperor." The maid walking with him tried to comfort a consort. "Your Highness is missing the late emperor again. Please restrain your grief and value your health." At that moment, Tu Lung still had no idea what was going on and merely glanced over in confusion. They're all women. Instead of protecting the home and the country, why are they putting on makeup and weeping like men? What kind of decorum is this? When she entered the main hall, she was finally somewhat stunned. She swept her gaze over everyone and silently made a quick assessment. Although these men are rather graceful and charming, this body of mine is only 15 years old, not yet of age. In ancient terms, coming of age means 20, right? Shouldn't they be offering servants to me instead? Suddenly, Tu Lung's head began to buzz. Wait, I keep feeling like something is wrong. This is not just the court where the ministers come to see the new emperor. At once they all knelt and saluted. This subject greets your majesty. Long live our emperor. Long live 10,000 years. Tu Lung's expression immediately hardened, and inwardly she was full of reproach. Ridiculous. How can men serve as officials and participate in court politics? Instead of staying at home to help their wives care for the children, they show their faces in public. They truly have no sense of masculine virtue. Seeing her cold expression, the attendant beside her quickly prompted her. Your Majesty, you should tell the ministers to rise. Tu Lung nodded and waved a hand lightly. Right, then, rise all of you. But inwardly, she was full of suspicion. Dine, what exactly is going on? They've allowed men to become officials. There isn't even a single woman present at court. A bold thought suddenly sprang into Tu Lung's mind. Could it be a world where men are supreme? Seeing that Tu Lung was unwell, the attendant had no choice but to step forward and handle matters for her. Today is the new emperor's first court session. If any ministers have memorials, present them. If not, withdraw. As it happened, several ministers below had already begun speaking. Your Majesty, this subject Zhao Sun has a matter to report. Now that your Majesty rules a nation and has also reached the age of hairpin ceremony, it is time. Men of age must marry wives. Women of age must marry husbands. All of us ministers are united in respectfully urging the new emperor. Together with the 4 regent ministers, we jointly request that your Majesty quickly choose an imperial husband and soon give birth to a dragon child to stabilize the nation. But the imperial tutor stepped forward, frowned, and refuted the proposal. My lords, Her Majesty is still young. She should focus on learning and improving herself first. There is no need to marry so urgently. The Great Hall immediately split into 2 opposing factions. What the imperial tutor says is unacceptable. The late emperor thought the same way back then, working late, rising early, never entering the harem. As a result, by the time his prime had passed, his lap was empty, and he had only Her Majesty as his sole daughter. Thinking of this, the ministers once again kowtowed and begged. We are only thinking for your Majesty's sake. While you are still young and healthy, you should quickly spread your branches and leaves and continue the bloodline. Dan Track, his face cold as ice, glanced at them as if questioning them. Then, according to the 4 of you, how many dragon children must Her Majesty bear before the nation can be considered stable? They hesitated for a moment. No, not right, at least 3 princes. Hearing this, she truly turned livid with anger. Tang Tan, I want to ask you one small question. Tu Lung's fair face flushed red as she asked such a delicate thing. You all know rather in our dine, do children crawl out of man's belly? Hearing that, the close attendant burst into giggles, but still forced himself to keep a serious expression as he explained. Your Majesty, since ancient times, only women can give birth. Children can only come out of a woman's belly. This news struck Tu Lung like a bolt from the blue. She collapsed onto the golden couch, as if numb with despair. I'm already dead. Don't wake me up. The close attendant was so frightened he shouted throughout the hall. Stop talking. Someone, summon the state preceptor. Her Majesty has suddenly fainted. A whole crowd rushed to the chamber to watch the state preceptor examine her. Her Majesty's body is not in serious condition. I've examined her already, he concluded. She has only just recovered from a serious illness. Her blood and qi are depleted, and she needs rest and recuperation. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. That's good. At that moment, Tu Lung pulled the blanket up to cover half her face and called softly, State Preceptor. Then does that mean I can't give birth to babies? Looking at her sparkling, near-tearful face, he immediately shook his head. Your Majesty need not worry. I will find some medicines to properly nurse your body back to health. Even having 2 children in 3 years would be no problem. All this information crashing down on her at once truly made it impossible for Tu Lung to swallow. Once again, she coughed up blood, giving everyone in the room another fright. Your Majesty, she could not understand it, and inwardly screamed at herself. This world is the one with a problem. Why do women have to give birth? At that moment, worried for her, Dan Track stepped out and cut them off. My lords, you are pressuring Tu Lung too far. That's right. Ladies face the gates of hell in childbirth. Once Her Majesty's health improves, it will not be too late to consider such major matters. The oldest minister immediately felt dissatisfied. But yet the imperial tutor continued. Before the late emperor passed away, His Majesty entrusted Her Majesty to me, Dan, If even a small matter like this cannot be decided by me, then what can? At the mention of the late emperor, the others all nodded and no longer dared argue. The imperial tutor is right. Your Majesty the Empress Dowager, what do you think? Even her mother tearfully agreed with Dan Track. Then let it be according to the imperial tutor's wishes. Since the Empress Dowager had spoken, the others could only obey. Very well, then in 2 years. 2 years from now is acceptable. But what she was most worried about right now was this. It's not that I'm afraid of marriage. I'm afraid of giving birth. If one is reborn, it should be like this. Please love this servant, your Majesty. Come now, wives and concubines in droves, children and grandchildren too many to count. That was what Tu Lung had imagined. Royal mother, kiss kiss, play with me, hug me. Royal mother, me too. But all of reality had brutally shattered that dream. Images of childbirth, heavy bleeding, death in labor, difficult birth, women giving birth so easily. Tu Lung went mad and tore the book apart. At that moment, attendant brought over the medicine. Your Majesty, time to take your medicine. Her mood had been like this for days. In the end, she could only comfort herself. Forget it. Looking at the bowl of medicine, Tu Lung muttered to herself, even weak men can endure the suffering of childbirth. How could I, a great empress, be afraid? Besides, my dynasty needs an heir to inherit the throne. Over there, attendant was dumbfounded, not even having time to pull out his usual tricks. Today, Her Majesty was actually drinking her medicine without needing to be coaxed. She did not even eat the candy he had prepared. For a moment, Tu Lung did not know how to explain. I'm done for. So the original owner was actually afraid of bitter medicine? Before she could explain anything, attendant lunged forward, eyes shining, his face full of surprise. I understand now. Your Majesty is the emperor now. You must maintain your dignity. You cannot let others think your Majesty is afraid of bitter medicine. She could only nod and admit it. Yes, that is right. I have none of this body's memories. At that moment, attendant beamed from ear to ear. Your Majesty has grown up. Your Majesty is amazing. Tu Lung, however, was thinking about the original owner's background. She knew nothing, not who was friend or foe, nor the state of the court. Sooner or later, once people saw through her, they would treat her like some kind of monster. Besides, the original owner had died suddenly just before ascending the throne, which was the only reason I got the chance to take over this body. Clearly, she had been murdered. Du Lung frone doje hashfully. I am in the light. The enemy is in the dark. I have to be careful in everything. At the Imperial Library, attendant escorted her out of the main hall, deeply puzzled. Your Majesty, why do you suddenly want to read the histories of the emperors of Daeong? She casually made up an excuse. Well, I miss Father Emperor. As soon as they arrived, Tu Lung curled her lip in appraisal. Who wrote this plaque? The handwriting looks like a dog's scribble, but attendant happily shared his thoughts. Every time I see it, I feel that the wild cursive Your Majesty wrote really contrasts beautifully with this library. Dogs are such adorable animals. Another keeper appeared. The moment he saw her, he sidled up to the Empress and whispered, Your Majesty, the new goods you ordered last time have arrived. This lowly official has hidden them in the old place. You understand, right? Tu Lung gave a perfunctory nod, while inwardly thinking, as if I would know where this old place is. When you go get them, it would be best not to let the Grand Imperial Tutor catch you. Hearing that, she was slightly startled. Did the original owner hide something? And she even had to keep it from her own teacher? Can't Master Dan handle even such a small matter? But from the look of it, he seemed to think he was on the Empress's side. Inside the library tower, Danjua was intently reading a book, his face growing redder and redder. The book read, Imperial Tutor Danjua pinned the Empress beneath him, both of them scantily dressed. Please don't, my lord. Please don't. I am a child you raised with your own hands. In my heart, I have long regarded you as a father. I submit to your Majesty, but you can only belong to me alone. Danjua had already sunk deep into the romance of the story, thoroughly flustered. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the library tower, she was carefully reading the history books and noticed some similarities. So that is how it is. This country is also called Daeong. This body is 15 years old this year. She has the same surname and given name as I do, also called Tu Lung. And she also found some information about him. The Imperial Tutor Danjua, held military power in his hands and had been sworn brothers with the late emperor, Cixing. He had a father-daughter bond with Tu Lung. He knew Tu Lung far too well and would easily spot my flaws. Reading this, she had only one thought: I cannot get too close to him. Next was the close guard, attendant, who was actually a humanoid puppet. On Tu Lung's 10th birthday, he had been bestowed upon her by the late emperor, Cixing, and had recognized Tu Lung as his master. Tu Lung glanced sideways and saw that he still looked innocent and childlike. These books should be enough for now. They're good for empty talk at least. Next was the state preceptor, Li Zhongxing, a mysterious wandering Taoist. He was the one who had given that puppet to the late emperor, Cixing, in exchange for the chance to stay in the palace long term to study the dynastic records. Medical books, ancient texts, those would be useful to me. Lastly came the ministers Zhao, Chun, Gao, and Gu, the four great regent ministers appointed by the late emperor. Each had her own faction and equal rank. None of them accepted the others. She put them on her list of people to keep at arm's length. And finally, the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager Zhao Xuetong had once given birth to a child, but that child died young, and she never bore another. She was related by blood to the regent minister, surnamed Zhao, and was not Tu Lung's birth mother. Recalling the way that woman had looked then, Tu Lung immediately grew wary of her. She was not her mother, yet she had cried like that. Suspicious. Then suddenly, she discovered something shocking. What? The imperial tutor and the Empress Dowager had once been betrothed? She recalled the previous world. Alung, I was originally engaged to your imperial tutor. It was your late emperor who deliberately stole him away. A woman embraced the imperial tutor, Lan Zhu, and softly asked, Tu Lung, your husband is already carrying my child in his belly. For the sake of the bond between teacher and student, and since this child's blood is half the same as yours, how about you grant her half your empire? Furious, Tu Lung slammed the table so hard that attendant jumped. Anger surged in her heart. I absolutely will not let what happened before repeat itself. Meanwhile, attendant merely stood outside and asked gently, Your Majesty, you've been reading so much you're about to suffocate. Would you like to go to that old place to change your mood? Tu Lung instantly caught the key words, old place. The guard had mentioned the old place too. Attendant promptly obeyed and led her there. After winding around for a while, they arrived, and inside, she ran into a familiar face. Imperial Tutor, Your Majesty. The moment he saw her, he raised a hand to cover the book in front of him, then bowed. This subject greets Your Majesty. Tu Lung stepped forward and asked, What book was Imperial Tutor reading just now that had you so absorbed? In the end, the title still stood out boldly below. What happens when the Imperial Tutor tops the Empress? By Sui Xianjun. Recalling old memories, she could not help shuddering. Whether in the previous world or in this one, the Imperial Tutor always wanted to harm me. You. Danjua tried his best to stay calm as he replied, Your Majesty, this was not originally mine. At that moment, attendant whispered into Tu Lung's ear, Your Majesty, did you forget? That was the storybook you bought outside the palace. Oh no, the Imperial Tutor actually saw it. Her trembling hand touched the book, and one steamy scene after another flashed before her eyes. Sorry, I cannot restrain myself. You must not. Tu Lung. She turned purple with rage. On top of that, they even used me and the Imperial Tutor as the models. Then she realized an especially striking truth. So the former Tu Lung had secretly been in love with the Imperial Tutor. So Her Majesty had realized it long ago. I thought those dark thoughts in my heart had deliberately borrowed this book to awaken me. The two of them both turned away awkwardly because of it. So embarrassing. This is mortifying. How am I supposed to face him from now on? How is he supposed to face me? After going through all those records, Tu Lung collapsed onto the desk in exhaustion. I am so tired. Ever since that incident, the atmosphere between me and the Imperial Tutor has turned strange. At court, neither of them could relax. I think the Imperial Tutor speaks wisely. In the Imperial Garden, it was no better. Imperial Tutor, what a coincidence. Yes, Your Majesty. Farewell. In the Imperial study, even during lessons, everything stayed tense. Your Majesty, this? Why are you standing so far away? Thinking back on the whole day, Tu Lung truly could not take it anymore. This is too embarrassing. Tu Lung blamed herself. I'm a dignified woman, yet I secretly admire an old man a whole cycle older than me. Are you that starve for fatherly love? Just then, attendant came up behind her and said loudly, Wasn't it because of the Imperial Tutor that Your Majesty refused to choose an Imperial consort that day? Here Hearing this truth, she went even more numb. No, I really cannot play this kind of empress. The other side was no different. Heaven, earth, ruler, subject, teacher. He picked up a rattan whip and actually lashed himself. Alung is not only your ruler, but also your student. Once a teacher, forever a father. Dun Zhuo. You are truly worse than a beast. In these thoughts of yours immediately. Meanwhile, the Empress Dowager was being pestered by the ministers. Your Majesty refuses to marry and refuses to bear a crown princess, and the imperial tutor still shields her. Now the imperial tutor commands troops and monopolizes great power. How can we ministers even speak in court? He is clearly trying to hold the son of heaven hostage and command the court in her name. We beseech Empress Dowager to govern from behind the curtain. We cannot allow them to continue acting recklessly. She shook her head shyly and said, "My lords, you jest. I am merely a woman. What would I know of ruling the realm?" The relationship between His Majesty and the imperial tutor is balanced and harmonious. Ruler and minister working together is a good thing. But the more she spoke, the more she revealed what she ought not reveal. However, your concerns are not without reason. His Majesty fears marriage. As her teacher, the imperial tutor ought to set an example. Hearing that, the officials nodded in agreement. What Empress Dowager says is very reasonable. Let's proceed that way. Fine. She had barely managed to close her eyes for a moment when a close attendant rushed in with news. Something terrible has happened, Your Majesty. The Empress Dowager wants to arrange a marriage for the state preceptor. Still drowsy, Tu Lung frowned and replied, "When a woman comes of age, she should marry. When a man comes of age, he should wed." The imperial tutor is already 28 this year. He ought to consider the matter of a lifelong partner. Though he is a bit older, and having children may be harder, still, he has power and status. Even half-aged, he retains his charm. If the Empress Dowager were to reward him with a few women, that would count as taking care of him while he labors over state affairs. But the more she thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. Thoughtful? What is the Empress Dowager trying to do to the imperial tutor? By the pavilion, Tu Lung and her close attendant crouched off to the side, eavesdropping shamelessly. There, imperial tutor Danjua respectfully declined the kindness. May Empress Dowager be blessed. But this subject already has someone in his heart. Please forgive me for being unable to obey. Empress Dowager sighed in apparent regret. Very well. Who is being so reckless? If His Majesty knew, she would surely be happy for you. Even while sneaking around and eavesdropping, that sentence made flames practically burst from Tu Lung's head. No, I am not happy. In her mind, one intimate image after another sprang up. Her husband finally dead, the widow deliberately staging this as a test. Trying to rekindle old feelings? Or perhaps the Empress Dowager wanted to use a marriage alliance with the imperial tutor to form a political alliance. No, I cannot allow it. Why not? The imperial tutor holds military power in his hands. Other than me, no one is allowed to win him over. At that moment, attendant poked his head out and softly voiced his guess. Your Majesty, the girl the imperial tutor spends the most time with every day is you. There's not even a single female mosquito in his residence. When would the imperial tutor ever get the chance to meet another woman? So, the imperial tutor actually likes men. Not wanting to delay any longer, she decided to pay him a direct visit in disguise. All kinds of floral incense and fruit were laid out on the table. I heard teacher has someone he likes, Tu Lung said as she sat opposite him with one leg crossed, interrogating him. Who is it? Tell me at once. I will immediately issue an edict granting you marriage. He glanced at her restless arm, then calmly pulled it down and shook his head. Your Majesty misunderstands. That day, this subject only used it as a temporary excuse to refuse the Empress Dowager. But Tu Lung happily patted his shoulder and advised him, I know. Then she shouted toward the door, Shixia, bring them in. Graceful, elegant young women followed the order and filed them one by one. Imperial tutor, feel free to choose. Danjua looked over them all as if petrified. Come now, everyone, step a little closer. Properly introduce yourselves to the imperial tutor. Shouts rang out in the residence. The imperial tutor actually dares reject the marriage arrangement. Does he not respect the Empress Dowager at all? He said he already loves someone else, But where is the truth in that? Even worse, the imperial tutor stopped us from urging His Majesty to marry. Yet the moment he turned around, he personally picked out a group of beautiful men to present to His Majesty. The Empress Dowager gave a soft hum and said, "That is good as well. It seems my guidance was not wasted." The imperial tutor has finally seen reason and has taken the initiative to choose an imperial consort for His Majesty. If the families of my lords have any sons of marriageable age, please recommend them enthusiastically. Do not fear gossip that you are favoring relatives. The officials chewed while waving their hands in refusal. What is Empress Dowager saying? We are worried about the foundation of Daiyang. It is not because we want to curry favor and seize power that we keep pressing His Majesty. Outside the residence gates, the lanterns of the four houses, Gu, Zhao, Chun, and Gong, were all parked at the entrance. The servants outside whispered among themselves. The sons of the four great ministers again? How many times has this been already? Shuo, stop talking nonsense. Inside the estate, Danjua stood beneath the shadow of a tree with a sword in hand, moving through graceful forms without pause. Suddenly, a servant came to report, "My lord, it is time." He asked softly, "Have all the young masters arrived?" "Yes, my lord, they have all come." Then let me go have a look." As he approached, he saw a tall, burly young man. A servant immediately introduced him. "Imperial tutor, this is the second son of Minister Chen's household. Honest, prudent, and skilled in martial arts. He can protect Her Majesty's safety at all times." Hearing this, Danjua waved a hand. His Majesty is looking for a husband, not a guard. This is the son of Minister Gao. Since childhood, he has diligently studied the 4 books and 5 classics. He is willing to assist His Majesty in becoming a wise ruler until death. After hearing that, Danjua's expression darkened even further. The harem must not interfere in state affairs. This is the adopted son raised by Minister Gu. Well taught and very sensible. His bedchamber skills are excellent, guaranteed to satisfy His Majesty night after night. 3 years, 2 children. Danjua roared in fury. Where did this thing come from? What proper person learns this sort of thing? He sighed helplessly. These are all useless. Imperial tutor, this is young Master Zhao. Before the sentence was finished, he cut him off. Is there anything else? Seeing that smile on his face, they all screamed in fright. We wish your lordship good health and every success. We take our leave. We also take our leave. Danjua watched them with a darkened face, then turned and left coldly. That night, the imperial tutor sat dazed with his chin propped on one hand, sketching the image of His Majesty onto paper. His eyes were pensive. "Your Majesty, how could I possibly bear to let anyone else have you?" His eyes gradually closed, and he recalled an old memory. A little girl came running in, calling, "Teacher, teacher." Father Emperor said teacher's family has gone far away recently and can never come back again, just like A Lung's mother consort. Hearing that, he looked at the little girl in silence. Her tiny hands gently stroked his cheek. "Then let A Lung be your family, all right? A Lung promises she will never leave teacher. Teacher too, okay? Don't leave A Lung alone like mother consort did, all right?" That made him smile, and he lightly kissed the little girl on the forehead. "All right." But suddenly the little girl slowly dissolved, leaving him staring blankly as he called out, "Elung?" Her agonized cry rang out, "Help! Teacher, save me! Save me! Alung! Alung! Teacher, save me! It hurts so much I'm going to die. I don't want to give birth." He jolted awake at once and shouted, "Alung!" His face turned pale, his mouth heaving for breath, his hands lifting blankly before his eyes before he covered his face tightly with them. Luckily, it was only a dream. Then he fell back with a helpless sigh. His Majesty is still only a child, and what is more, she never expected that the teacher who instructed her in rights and morality would come to feel this way about her. What right do I have to blame her? From outside came an announcement. The state preceptor has arrived. A little later, in the Empress's bedchamber, the state preceptor slowly entered. A servant reported, "At this hour, His Majesty is not in her chambers. She has gone to visit Lady Qiu Yuanying." "State preceptor, you may go there and take a look." Hearing this, he said softly, "Then let us go to Lady Qiu Yuanying's place." "My lord, what exactly is this gift we want to present to Her Majesty?" "This is the grand gift the imperial tutor asked us to find and bring back for Her Majesty." A grand gift? Yes. If Her Majesty receives this gift, she will definitely be very pleased. Meanwhile, Along suddenly started sneezing nonstop. Has Your Majesty caught a cold? Even more unexpectedly, among those women, there really was a little girl. Greetings, Lord Imperial Tutor. The clever child introduced herself briskly. My name is Luya. I just turned 8 this year. Please choose me. I can warm your bed. Pick me. The Imperial Tutor's face instantly darkened as he questioned her. Is Your Majesty joking? She's still a child. How could she possibly? She merely let out a calm, "Oh." The Imperial Tutor doesn't like her? Very well, next. Then a graceful and ladylike woman stepped in. This humble one is Rong Yin, 28 years old. I have long heard that Lord Imperial Tutor is well-versed in poetry, books, rites, and music. If fate allows us to become husband and wife, we would surely be a harmonious match, treating each other with mutual respect. The Imperial Tutor was somewhat startled, standing before that woman. All he could think of was the person in his heart. This woman even resembled Her Majesty somewhat in appearance. The more he thought about it, the more firmly he shook his head in refusal. No, I cannot. If I truly married this sort of substitute, and outsiders noticed that it revealed I liked Her Majesty, it would be a humiliation to Her Majesty. The sovereign cannot be replaced. Seeing his expression, the Empress had already guessed part of it. You don't like this one either? Next, I am Yi Fanghua, 15 this year, the same age as Your Majesty. This girl was more playful and lively in her melancholy charm. So, you are the Imperial Tutor? Then she blurted out words that left him speechless. At your age, I could have given birth to a daughter as big as me already. In the end, she too was dragged out, but her mouth still kept running. But you really don't look old at all. I could wait until I'm an old maid. Then another pair entered, a set of twins. I am 11. I am 15. We are Dragon Phoenix twins. We have never been separated since our mother's womb. Seeing the two sisters, the Imperial Tutor seemed a little alarmed and stepped back. Dragon Phoenix twins, and they even laid the groundwork in advance. Her Majesty said Lord Imperial Tutor may choose as he pleases, according to the truest feelings in his heart. What happens here is known only to heaven and earth, and to you and us. At the side, the attendant chimed in cheerfully, and I know too. Sir, wouldn't men be better? That way it wouldn't violate propriety. That made the Imperial Tutor so furious he nearly saw stars. What is wrong with her? I'm a straight man, and she thinks I like men? And she's even trying to pair me with these Dragon Phoenix twins? The attendant panicked and hurriedly apologized. All right, I understand. After thinking for a while, she scratched her head and offered a final solution. There's no other way. Tong Tan, bring in the female assassin. But Tong Tan felt it was inappropriate. Your Majesty, the Imperial Tutor was raised with propriety and moral teachings. He probably wouldn't have such strange tastes, but she thought otherwise. What do you know? The more a gentleman is restrained by ritual, the more he buries thoughts that can never see the light. The Imperial Tutor truly had no idea what new scheme the young Empress was plotting now. He only had one feeling, an ominous premonition. Humans have desires. If those desires are never satisfied, then either one cultivates into a sage or suppresses them until one becomes worse than a beast. Only then did Tong Tan nod in understanding. So that's how it is. I understand now. I'll go at once. He quickly returned with another woman. This common woman, Chio Mimi, has long admired Lord Imperial Tutor. I beg the Imperial Tutor to grant me and the child in my womb a place to stay. The Imperial Tutor stepped forward and asked with gentle concern, Madam, where is the child's father? But she merely shook her head indifferently. I don't know. She gave an embarrassed and shy smile as she admitted, that night at Drunken Moon House, I entertained too many patrons. This common woman truly. For reference, Drunken Moon House was the #1 brothel in the capital. Seeing that things were going badly, the Empress had no choice but to cut in and explain further. Pretty, a woman, and already pregnant. Wasn't that what we were looking for? The Imperial Tutor angrily seized her hand, his gaze overflowing with coldness. Du Lung. Startled, she immediately flushed red all over. If Sir doesn't like it, then forget it. I won't press you anymore. No, don't be angry. The look in his eyes finally softened a little, and his hand slowly loosened. Forget it. It is this subject's fault. That day, I should not have stopped your majesty from choosing an imperial consort. Just as she was growing up, she was at the age when she would naturally yearn for romance. He stepped forward and spoke words that wounded his own heart. This subject knows quite a few talented young men in the capital. I am willing to recommend worthy husbands for your majesty. Behind him, Tu Lung watched his back with a trace of bitterness. Wait, sir. But no matter how she called, the imperial tutor did not turn back. His heart was bound to Tu Lung. Once your majesty has someone who pleases her, my delusional feelings for her should finally be severed. Before entering the room, she summoned her close attendant and gave instructions in private. Tong Tan, I have some private matters as a woman to discuss with her. Wait here. Do not follow me. The moment he heard that, his eyes welled up in protest. But not for too long, your majesty. To this subordinate, one moment without seeing you feels like 3 autumns apart. Looking at Tong Tan like this, she had only one thought. Are you my puppy or what? After entering the room and listening to Miss Chiu tell her story, she nearly blurted out, what? Every day, countless men come to your door on their own, wanting to sleep with you. Chiu nodded in confirmation. Yes, your majesty. Her eyes shone with delight. And they still have to pay me. There is actually such a wonderful line of work in this world. But in this world, women were the ones responsible for bearing children. After thinking for a while, she asked again, Chiu Mimi, I still have one more question. Tu Lung was both shy and eager to know the truth. Things between a woman and a man. Is it really that pleasurable? Chiu Mimi smiled lightly. Why, of course. It is extremely delightful. Hearing that, Tu Lung could no longer manage even a smile. At that moment, Chiu Mimi's sharp eyes saw right through her. Could it be that your majesty is still untouched? Having her innermost secret exposed, Tu Lung turned away in embarrassment. Since the age of 10, I have reviewed countless men. Don't talk nonsense. Chiu Mimi's gaze said she understood everything. Then your majesty should know that, in reality, women can also find great pleasure with women. As she spoke, she tugged Tu Lung closer. And there is no need to suffer the hardships of childbirth. Does your majesty dare to try a few moves with this servant? At that moment, Tong Tan and the state preceptor happened to walk in. Your majesty. Caught red-handed by the two of them, the truth came out. The one with peculiar tastes was actually her majesty herself. Truly worthy of her majesty. She rushed out in a fluster, hurriedly explaining, I didn't. Even after living 2 lives, I'm still innocent. At that moment, Chiu Mimi was lying on the floor in pain. Girl, I think I'm about to give birth. It hurts so much. Tu Lung quickly ran back in, filled with worry. Someone hurry. The midwife appeared and took command of everything with one hand. Hot water. Hold her down. It's all blood. Another basin. It hurts. The baby's head is coming out. Everyone else out. After that, Chiu Mimi gave birth smoothly. Standing close by, the state preceptor observed the child's birth chart. Not bad. Official star in useful position. Fortune flowing like clouds. Great nobility. This birth chart is excellent. In the future, perhaps he may even bring rank to his husband. Tong Tan cried out to her, Your Majesty, look. But by then, Tu Lung had already gone pale and was trembling in fear. How terrifying when a woman gives birth. Tong Tan frowned in confusion and tried hard to explain. But, Your Majesty, you are a woman. Women eventually must have children. Terrified, she backed away anxiously. No, I don't want that. I'm afraid of childbirth. I don't want to give birth. I want to cut off love and sever desire altogether. At that moment, the state preceptor appeared like a savior to smooth things over. Your Majesty need not worry. The imperial tutor specifically instructed this humble minister to research and develop a worry-free contraceptive garment for you. Safe, hygienic, long-lasting, and effective at preventing venereal disease. He kept introducing the product without pause. In the future, if you wish to have children, you may have a few. If you wish to have them later, then later. Looking at the box, tears welled up in her eyes again. That still means giving birth. In the end, she collapsed to the ground and fainted on the spot, completely despairing. Your Majesty, someone, call the state preceptor. Her Majesty has fainted again. The man was standing right behind him and nodded. I am already here. Don't make such a fuss over everything. If someone with ulterior motives overhears, Who knows what it will be twisted into? After the state preceptor explained, Tong Tan finally lowered his voice. Yes, but not long after, outside, the palace maids began gossiping among themselves. Did you hear? Her Majesty fainted at the sight of childbirth. Just then, the Empress Dowager happened to pass by and overhear it. I heard Her Majesty fainted, and before fainting, she even gave birth to a child. Have you heard? Her Majesty is a foolish ruler. She is most fond of romantic indulgence, and can even bear children herself. On the bed, she still lay motionless. The state preceptor remained at her side, and at last came to a conclusion. Her Majesty did not faint. She was poisoned. What? But ever since Her Majesty awoke, this subordinate has not left her side for even half a step each day. Then, recalling something, he slapped his hand and recounted it. Except for today. Her Majesty suddenly said she wanted to speak to Chio Mimi about women's matters and would not allow this subordinate to follow. This is clearly workplace gender discrimination in the inner palace. Even the state preceptor felt he had gone too far and barked. Silence. Being scolded, Tong Tan had no choice but to obediently comply. Only the three closest people remained in the room, and the state preceptor spoke plainly. The people behind Her Majesty's previous drowning and unconsciousness appear to be the same group. It seems that this time, they were unable to approach Her Majesty's person directly, so they laced the courtesan Chio Mimi's food with poison. His hand lightly touched her skin. This poison is harmless to women, but once their blood and monthly flow disperse it into fragrance, it can trigger the 7-day goo within Her Majesty's body. Last time, for the sake of saving Her Majesty's life, the imperial tutor asked this poor Taoist to intervene. He staked 30 years of his lifespan in exchange for one thing, summoning back Her Majesty's soul, which had remained adrift in another world of reincarnation. The state preceptor smiled faintly in teasing. I wonder what the imperial tutor intends to use as the price in this new bargain. In the end, the imperial tutor and the state preceptor agreed to another transaction. Agreed. We must not delay any longer. He began unfurling a strip of white silk. Then let us begin at once. The silk moved according to the state preceptor's will and wrapped itself around Tu Lung's body, making the imperial tutor turn his face away in embarrassment. Not long after, state preceptor eagerly turned to him for help. May I trouble Lord Imperial Tutor to remove Her Majesty's clothes? What? He shrugged after using the silk bands to lift her into a seated position. Next, I will insert needles throughout Her Majesty's body to cleanse her tendons and marrow, force the blood poison out through the meridians, and send the 7-day goo in her body back into dormancy. Hearing this, the imperial tutor frowned in confusion and disapproval. In other words, you must touch all of Her Majesty's bare skin with your hands? Li Zhongxing spread his hands helplessly. This poor Taoist is also afraid of pricking the wrong acupoints. If I don't see clearly first, he immediately refused in anger. No, state preceptorly proposed another method. Then we can switch the medium. I can simply tell him the acupoints verbally. Their gazes turned toward him again. But the imperial tutor still stubbornly refused to comply. Tong Tan was still dressed as a man. In everyone's eyes, he was a man. Thinking of that, Li Zhongxing realized the only one left who could serve as the medium was him. Then, Lord Imperial Tutor, you must do it personally. But his heart remained firm in resistance. Her Majesty and I are teacher and sovereign. If she learned of this in the future, how could she bear it? But the state preceptor's next words finally shook the imperial tutor's conflicted heart. So long as you do not speak, and I do not speak, how would Her Majesty ever know? He answered under his breath, but I would have wronged her heart. After another moment's thought, he still objected. In any case, I am her teacher. I am not the appropriate person. State Preceptor Li's face had turned black with annoyance, yet he still tried his best to restrain himself. Don't get angry. This mortal is truly too troublesome. We cultivators must have professional ethics. We must respect the other party. He could only choose his words carefully and say a few more things. Then suddenly, a strange spirit beast burst out from Tu Lung's side. Your Majesty, It was also the first time the imperial tutor had seen such a thing, and he stammered in alarm. State Preceptor. What is that? But State Preceptorly reacted as if he had found a treasure and threw himself to the ground in worship. Great Immortal, at last, you have revealed your spirit form. He heard the words, but did not understand them. Great Immortal? Kneeling on the ground, Li Zhongxing announced, your unfilial 18th generation disciple descendant, Li Zhongxing, is here to pay respects to the Great Immortal. The Great Immortal screeched noisily, roughly meaning, listening to you youngsters talk is driving this ancestor to death from anxiety. If you drag this out for even one more moment, this mortal will have the heart enchantment goo invade her vital centers and die. Li Zhongxing immediately shouldered the heavy responsibility. Yes, Zhongxing understands. We must act quickly. Then the Great Immortal turned and scolded the imperial tutor harshly. This one is even more old-fashioned than I am. Serve him right. No wonder he's still single at this age. Even State Preceptor, Li had to cover his mouth and laugh in amusement. The imperial tutor had no idea why. Why is the State Preceptor suddenly looking at me like that? At last, Li Zhongxing coughed a few times and regained his composure. Lord Imperial Tutor, this is the situation. This Great Immortal has been enshrined by me for many years. This time, it deliberately manifested to issue a warning. His tone grew more solemn as he reminded him, Her Majesty is in danger. I ask Lord Imperial Tutor to temporarily put aside worldly prejudice and the barrier between men and women and save Her Majesty. But the truth was, the imperial tutor really did not want to do this. State Preceptor, is there truly no other way? State Preceptorly bluntly shook his head. No, surely Lord Imperial Tutor is not like those rotten hypocrites who think a woman's chastity is more important than Her Majesty's life. He turned and looked at her and at last agreed. I understand. State Preceptorly sat to one side and drank tea. Next, the imperial tutor also covered his eyes, though it did nothing to hide the embarrassment written all over his face. Please press the acupoints as this poor Taoist reports them, and insert the needles one by one as directed. Understood. The imperial tutor's trembling hand finally touched her waist. Slowly, he loosened the knot, and her robe gradually slid down to mid-body. Behind him, the State Preceptor analyzed leisurely. The poison has accumulated most heavily around Her Majesty's waist. Lord Imperial Tutor, begin the acupuncture there. The imperial tutor nodded slightly. Understood. His hand hesitated as it reached for the needle the Great Immortal had prepared. The curtain hung low, revealing only half a glimpse. In her haze, Tu Lung cried out sharply in pain. Seeing the person he loved, gritting her teeth to endure it, he could not bear it and pleaded for help. State Preceptor, Her Majesty says it hurts. Outside, however, State Preceptorly continued sipping tea with complete calm. Pain is normal. Only the dead feel nothing. This poor Taoist needle technique is already taking effect. Lord Imperial Tutor continued quickly. Faced with such words, he could only grit his teeth and comply. Your Majesty, forgive this offense. Her whole body trembled and tears streamed down her face. Even the Imperial Tutor broke out in a cold sweat from worry. Another long needle was inserted into her body. Needle after needle covered Tu Lung's body. The pain became so unbearable that Tu Lung cried out, "It hurts." Seeing that, the imperial tutor's heart clenched as well. Your Majesty. He reached out and pulled her tightly into his arms, whispering, "Please endure it a little longer." But suddenly he froze and reproached himself. What on earth am I doing? Tu Lung sobbed and begged. It hurts so much. The imperial tutor steadied his resolve. Her Majesty is suffering this much. The urgent matter now is to remove the goo poison from Her Majesty's body. The great immortal also rushed in to help. Don't move around. The imperial tutor, however, was dazed by his own thoughts. Why do I feel excited? Realizing the impropriety of his thoughts, he could only murmur an apology. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Yet he wanted even more. His eyes remained fixed on Tu Lung as he thought of what he truly wanted most. He wanted Her Majesty. Then his lips brushed hers. She was to belong only to him. But before he could touch her, she pushed him away. Bleg. At that moment, the great immortal also let out a tired sigh of relief. It's over. Good girl. How is she? Over here, the imperial tutor's heart sank to the bottom as he wondered. Is it over? After making sure she was fine, the great immortal turned and giggled as he teased the imperial tutor. You old little weakling. You can't even handle this tiny bit of stimulation. I even toward Her Majesty. The next morning, the Empress of Dai finally woke groggily. At her bedside, the attendant's eyes were already glistening with tears. Your Majesty, you've finally awakened. I was worried sick for you. Startled, she quickly pushed him away. I'm fine. I'm all right. Let go of me. After helping her sit up, he fired off a whole string of questions. Your Majesty, does anything hurt? She shook her head. No, but when she recalled what had happened before, her face flushed red with embarrassment. They said deep unconsciousness meant losing awareness. But why had her consciousness been so clear? This time, she truly had no way to face the Imperial Tutor. Meanwhile, the Imperial Tutor and the State Preceptor were discussing the poison in the Empress of Daeung's body. For now, Her Majesty is no longer in immediate danger. But if this thing is not removed within 7 days, then for every day it remains, Her Majesty will remain under its control. The State Preceptor continued, the life-extending method can only be used once in a person's lifetime, and at most it can prolong life by 5 years. Before Her Majesty turns 20, the Imperial Tutor must find a way to remove the goo from her. Otherwise, looking at her smiling figure, the Imperial Tutor felt a pang of anguish rise in him. She forced a laugh. I'm really fine. He lowered his gaze and nodded as if he understood. I know. After returning to the room, the State Preceptor raised his cup in thanks. Many thanks to the Great Immortal for your help this time. The Great Immortal nodded and reminded him, instead of thanking me, it would be better to quickly pay up for that old boy. With the 1,000-year fortune of the Dan clan, the greatest noble family under heaven, my ancestor will surely be able to ascend now. Hearing this, the State Preceptor teased the Great Immortal. Are you in such a hurry to leave the mortal world, Great Immortal? Don't you feel even a little reluctant to part with this poor Taoist? At that, the creature became flustered. Well, that. Then it puffed up and declared, once I ascend, I'll bless your business so wealth pours in. But in the end, it was only a joke. What he truly cared about was this. Have you thought about where to go, Great Immortal? I've served you for many years not because I hoped for repayment. But he still took the initiative to remind it. There are too many eyes and ears in the palace. Ascending will cause a huge disturbance, so you should change to a quieter place. Suddenly, the Great Immortal's eyes shimmered with tears. The Great Immortal threw itself at its disciple, deeply moved. You're the most devout believer I've ever met. Then tomorrow, meet me here. I'll take you somewhere. The next day, the room where the two had agreed to meet was strangely empty and desolate. Furious, the Great Immortal immediately reverted to its true form, throwing the entire palace into uproar. The observatory exploded. It exploded. The Great Immortal stretched across the sky, terrifying everyone who saw it. Didn't the star-viewing tower just explode? Why is it back to its original form now? It's a huge fox. Furious, the Great Immortal unleashed thunder and lightning. Li Zhongxing, you swindling fraud. How dare you monopolize the Dan clan's 1,000-year fortune and ruin my ascension plan? Did you really think you could escape my grasp? Its claws slashed fiercely through the sky. Dream on. This time, I'll get to the bottom of it. I'm a little fox immortal. My mouth may be a little sharp, and I smile all day, but I am not easy to bully. After that grand self-introduction, the Great Immortal flicked its fan. In the sky appeared a teaching of 1,000 eyes, vision over all living things. The Great Immortal flicked it once more. Go! Countless eyes flew up into the sky and scattered in every direction. The Great Immortal said angrily, once I catch him, I'll torment that swindler to death. The next day, at the moon viewing platform, all those eyes returned to report. What? It was so upset it could hardly believe it. You couldn't find him? The Great Immortal's eyes glistened with tears as it cried out, Why? Why are you treating me like this? Even that swindler looks down on me now. The Great Immortal wailed loudly in grievance. I just wanted to find a loyal believer to worship me and help me ascend sooner. Suddenly, the magic in front of it began to fade away. It cried out in alarm, no, my spiritual power. Wait, no, don't take it away. In the end, it let out a shrill cry and reverted to its original form again. I want to level up and ascend already. Why is that so hard? The Great Immortal could hardly bear it and kept cursing him in its heart. Li Zhongxing, you idiot swindler. Even in death, I won't let you go. At that moment, the attendant and the Imperial Tutor were investigating a serious matter. What happened? I only ordered the imperial guards to inspect the palace servants responsible for the mid-autumn food preparations. What did you all do? This person is already dead. The attendant hurriedly reported. Please judge wisely, Lord Imperial Tutor. When this subordinate received orders to arrest them, by the time we arrived, they had already been poisoned to death. The Imperial Tutor frowned. The one behind this had already extended a murderous hand into the palace. They still had not discovered when exactly Her Majesty had been implanted with the goo, nor how it had been done. At that moment, the Imperial Tutor seethed inwardly, and after what he had done with Her Majesty, he did not hesitate. His sharp voice rang out, "Continue investigating for me. Among the 9 clans, anyone connected to this matter is to be arrested immediately." A guard instantly bowed his head. "Yes, sir." The Imperial Tutor narrowed his eyes, killing intent spreading from him like ice. Better to kill by mistake than let one slip through. With that, his figure vanished into the void amid streams of crimson power. Seeing this, the 2 attendants could not help but marvel. As expected of Lord Imperial Tutor, Her Majesty's close general, another guard added, "He comes without a trace and leaves without a shadow. His martial arts are truly profound." Meanwhile, elsewhere, the Empress of Dai was soaking in warm water, flower fragrance drifting around her. She called out, "Attendant, after I fainted that day, what happened? How did the Imperial Tutor and the State Preceptor save me?" "Do you know?" Sitting outside the screen, the attendant replied with a smile, "Your Majesty needn't worry. The State Preceptor said Your Majesty fainted because you were dizzy." Hearing that, she fell silent. That brat actually believed the State Preceptor's nonsense. At the time, I was trapped in a dark sea of consciousness. Although I was powerless to control my body, I was still conscious. I could hear the people beside me talking. Whoever was losing blood would end up like this or like that. Suddenly, the attendant's voice sounded again. "Your Majesty, your anemia must be from overexerting yourself reading books." This subordinate heard that reading too hard doesn't just harm one's spirit and blood chi. It can also make one go bald later. The corner of her lips twitched. She thought irritably, "Who are you calling bald?" Ignoring his babbling, the Empress of Dai sank into her memories. She remembered hearing them say, "The last time the Imperial Tutor saved this poor Taoist, he sacrificed 30 years of his own lifespan in order to preserve Her Majesty's life. To save Her Majesty's soul trapped in the world of reincarnation. I was originally on the same side as Her Majesty. If she discovers it, what will happen? Her Majesty's waist is severely poisoned. Imperial Tutor, begin the acupuncture from here." I never expected it. Never expected it. This body was originally mine to begin with. Since today I have returned after going once through the world of reincarnation, it can be considered that the object is returned to its rightful owner. I had heard the State Preceptor mention before the life-preserving art of extending one's life. This time, after my rebirth, the Imperial Tutor actually sacrificed so much for me. The Empress of Dai rose from the bath and draped a thin robe over herself. She suddenly remembered. According to the rules governing women, he had touched my skin, so I ought to take responsibility for him. As she walked, she continued to think, "But he has always kept things from me, and clearly has no wish for me to repay him. Or perhaps he harbors no feelings between man and woman toward me at all, only wanting to remain a pure and loyal minister. Fine then, for my sake, he can abandon his own reputation, his life, and even his clan. I've already taken too much advantage of him. Since he does not want it, I will grant him his wish." Suddenly, a flash of light shot straight toward her. She looked up in surprise. This light felt somewhat familiar. Outside, the attendant still had no idea what was happening and continued reminding her, "Your Majesty, please rest. The affairs of court are already being handled by the Imperial Tutor on your behalf." Before she could even react, 2 streams of power swept both the Empress of Dayang and the Imperial Tutor away to the observatory, where the great immortal was already waiting. Both of them were left stunned, still not understanding what had happened. The Imperial Tutor turned and froze when he saw that the Empress of Dayang was wearing only a loosely draped, thin bathing robe. He stammered, his voice faltering, "Your Majesty." She was equally flustered by the man's sudden appearance. "Sir," seeing the embarrassed expression on the Imperial Tutor's face, A strange feeling suddenly stirred at her heart. So this is what a man's loyalty looks like, blushing the moment he sees me. Reacting at lightning speed, the imperial tutor hurriedly removed his outer robe and draped it over her to cover her. Their eyes met, and in the silent space, both their cheeks faintly reddened. The imperial tutor carefully wrapped the robe tightly around the Empress of Daeung, his movements both decisive and gentle. His gaze shifted elsewhere, and his voice carried a trace of awkwardness. Be careful not to catch cold, Your Majesty. Watching the tender scene before it, the great immortal exploded in anger. Have you looked enough? I used my last spiritual power to summon you here. If you help me capture Li Zhongxing before it could finish, the great immortal shot toward them like an arrow. Seeing this, the Empress of Daeung instinctively turned and shielded the imperial tutor, shouting, "Sir, be careful." But before the great immortal could touch either of them, it slammed straight into the ground. The imperial tutor stared in surprise and unconsciously placed a hand on her shoulder to reassure her. Feeling the pressure of his hand, she thought, "He's angry." She immediately warned, "It can smash the floor to pieces." The great immortal retreated backward. In the midst of the chaos, the two of them accidentally clasped each other's hands tightly. The imperial tutor's face flushed scarlet, his heart pounding wildly. "Your Majesty." Meanwhile, the great immortal remained stuck to the ground, crying pitifully. At that moment, the imperial tutor released her hand and walked over to look at the paper posted on the pillar. Seeing its contents, he thought, could it be this? Then he turned to look at the great immortal in confusion. The great immortal had just managed to lift its head and was cursing. "Li Zhongxing, you bastard, you liar. Disgusting. I was the one who saved you. So you too have to take responsibility and find him for me." Hearing this, the Empress of Daeung had no idea what it was talking about and thought irritably, "I can't understand a single thing." Then suddenly she turned to look at the imperial tutor, her gaze unconsciously becoming entranced. "Imperial tutor, looking carefully, I have seen countless men in this world, yet I have never seen anyone more beautiful than the imperial tutor." As soon as that thought flashed through her mind, she quickly smacked the thought back into place. "Wake up, Dulung. You are a principled, wise ruler. You cannot do something so improper in the workplace." Beside her, the great immortal was still rambling. "Disgusting mortals. You dare look down on this great immortal." The Empress of Daeung's ears were getting irritated. With a flick of her finger, she scolded, "Noisy thing." With just that light flick, the great immortal, which had been on the table, went tumbling straight to the ground, rolling several times before crashing into a pillar. Startled, she asked, "Are you all right?" "I didn't even use much force." The great immortal lay sprawled flat on the floor, sobbing aggrievedly as it said, "Li Zhongxing cut off my spiritual power. I'm getting weaker and weaker. Now any mortal can injure me with a single finger. How am I supposed to survive in this world from now on?" Only then did the imperial tutor step forward and report with clasped hands, "Reporting to Your Majesty, I have searched thoroughly outside." Seeing that he looked excessively formal, the Empress of Daeung waved a hand and said with a smile, "Sir, in front of me, you needn't be so cautious." Only then did the imperial tutor dare to sneak a glance at her before quickly lowering his eyes again. "Impropriety must not be looked upon. Don't wrap me up like a rice dumpling." The imperial tutor paused, remembering how he had wrapped her up so tightly in the robe. Suddenly, he came back to himself. "Your Majesty, last night the state preceptor left the palace, saying that his fated ties with the mortal world were exhausted and that he was retiring elsewhere. As for this one," as he spoke, he handed a letter to the Empress of Daeung, leaving her utterly stunned, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked at the tearful fox on the table while listening to him continue. "Judging by his behavior, this should be the great immortal enshrined by the state preceptor." Hearing that, the attendant raised a question. "But judging from the appearance, I don't know why it doesn't look like what this subordinate saw before. It doesn't really look like a fox, more like some tiger-striped cat." The moment the fox heard that, it went from sniffling pitifully to glaring in outrage and shouting, "I've already been reduced to this state, and you can still see through my true form?" The Empress of Daeung stared blankly for a moment, then bent down. One hand on her hip, she lifted the fox with the other. So this little thing is a baby fox. The little fox immediately shrieked indignantly. Can I be a fox that cultivated into a fox immortal? But at that moment, the imperial tutor's attention was drawn to another tablet placed on the table like an altar. What is this? Sang Shui, Great Immortal. On the tablet was written, Lord of Heaven and Earth, Sang Shui, Great Immortal. The moment they finished reading it, both the Empress of Dai Ung and the imperial tutor had the same thought. That name absolutely must not be spoken aloud. The imperial tutor then explained, Your Majesty, I once saw the state preceptor serve it with great reverence and politeness. I do not know why he suddenly abandoned it here. Unfortunately, we do not speak the same language, so we cannot ask what exactly happened. Looking into the imperial tutor's sincere eyes, and with him standing so close, the Empress of Dai Ung felt a little flustered and merely hummed in agreement. The imperial tutor is right. Holding the little fox gently in her arms, she stroked it lightly and thought from afar. The imperial tutor is always thorough and thoughtful. The state preceptor clearly fled overnight after trying to devour the Dan clan's 1,000-year fortune, leaving this little thing behind with us. It was panting heavily. He must have meant for me to uphold justice for it, to capture the state preceptor and make him return what rightfully belongs to it. While she was lost in speculation, the little fox suddenly cried out a few times. She lifted it up and said gently, Little fox immortal, the state preceptor has shown me kindness, and you do have some connection to him. How about I keep you by my side from now on? Hearing this, the fox's eyes instantly sparkled with excitement. Mortal, you said it yourself. You want to become my believer. And the Empress of Dai Ung still was not finished. Delighted, she pressed it against her cheek and turned to ask, Sir, what do you think? She had thought the imperial tutor would be just as pleased as she was, but instead he stood there frowning thoughtfully, his heart beating irregularly. After thinking for a moment, he answered, As long as your majesty does not make it the guardian deity of a nation, then whatever your majesty wishes is fine. At once, the Empress of Dai Ung beamed like a child who had just been given candy. Then it's happily decided. She gazed attentively at the great immortal, so small and adorable, and wondered, a guardian deity? Do immortals and demons truly exist in this world? Did I miss all this because I used to read the history of Dai Ung too carelessly? Then the state preceptor dared to deceive even a fox immortal. There's probably no evil deed he would not do. But then she lifted her eyes to the man standing before her. Even so, with resolute eyes and a hand clenched tight, she vowed inwardly, No matter the cost, whatever was taken from you, I will get it back for you. In a room faintly scented with fragrance, the attendant sat cross-legged on a chair and said casually, So, your majesty needs to rest more. Everything in all state affairs are already being handled by the imperial tutor on your behalf. Meanwhile, the Empress of Dai Ung, dressed in dragon robes, sat on the throne, leisurely stuffing a large pastry into her mouth. Your Majesty only needs to live happily every day and be a carefree ruler. Then the attendant reminded her, Your most urgent task right now is still to give Sir several children to dandle on his knee. What do you think, Your Majesty? It was a soul-level mission, daily oral practice. The attendant stood outside waiting and got no reply. He peeked in slightly, but was immediately overwhelmed by the scene inside. Your Majesty, if you keep soaking, your dragon body will wear away. Please get up and put your clothes. On the water before his eyes floated scattered rose petals in clear blue water, mingled with a rich fragrance. A butterfly fluttered inside it, causing the attendant to freeze and then scream. Your Majesty! Outside, the sun was still shining brightly, but inside the room the attendant was shouting in horror, his face pale. Men, hurry and invite the imperial tutor. Her Majesty has turned into a butterfly. The attendant ran off in a panic, clutching the butterfly in his hand, while the butterfly itself could only despair. Foolish soul, I'm a black butterfly. As soon as he stepped outside, attendant stopped short. A few palace maids were gathered over there, gossiping about Her Majesty and the imperial tutor. Attendant also craned his neck to look. Below, in the sunlit courtyard, golden leaves drifted in the wind. The imperial tutor was walking beside the Empress of Dai Ung. Seeing her cloak about to slip off, he reminded her and pulled it back up for her. Your Majesty, your robes. Tu Lung replied gently, Sorry to trouble you. The two gazed at each other tenderly. Behind them, Great Immortal, carrying that spirit tablet, reminded them, Sir, stop there. Don't go any farther. Only then did Tu Lung snap out of it and take off the cloak she was wearing. Right, your robe. Then she gently draped it back over the imperial tutor's shoulders. Great Immortal was left gaping, utterly stunned from being force-fed such blatant romance. The onlookers above were no different. Everyone was practically screaming that this couple was too sweet. In the soft autumn sunlight, with yellow leaves fluttering down, Tu Lung looked at him sincerely and said with a gentle smile, "The weather has turned cold lately, sir. Please take care not to catch a chill and keep yourself warm." The imperial tutor was a little shy too. "This subject thanks your majesty for your concern. I also ask that your majesty take good care of your imperial health." This subject takes his leave. After bidding farewell, he turned and walked away. Tu Lung still stood there watching him, even calling after him, "Be careful on the road." Though the imperial tutor did his best not to show it. Inside he was so happy he was practically going mad, his face burning red with embarrassment as he wanted to shout, "Your Majesty." Even after he had already left, Tu Lung's gaze remained fixed on him with longing. Seeing that, Great Immortal shouted, "Enough already! Hurry up and set up an altar and shrine for me." The romantic moment was abruptly interrupted, making Tu Lung unhappy. She grabbed Great Immortal and snapped, "I can't understand a word you're saying. You're so noisy. Shut that mouth." That night, with the bright moon high in the sky, attendant carried in several baskets and placed them on the table. "Your Majesty, the cat bed you ordered this servant to prepare is finished. Are you really going to let your pet sleep in the imperial study?" On the other side, Tu Lung was bent over a pile of documents and only answered, "That's right," while cuddling Great Immortal. Attendant said cheerfully, "But this servant heard that if a pet sleeps with its master, the bond between them becomes much closer." The moment he said that, Great Immortal reacted furiously. "Disgusting mortal. When a tiger doesn't show its might, you take me for a cat. A tiger may be killed, but it cannot be humiliated. This Great Immortal is not a pet. I want to sleep in a divine hall. Hurry up and prepare one for me." He had thought that would scare Attendant. Instead, Attendant made fun of Great Immortal. "Your Majesty, look, it's angry. Seems it really likes the cat bed I prepared. No need to thank me. Hurry up and try your little bed." Then Attendant tossed Great Immortal into the nest. To his surprise, Great Immortal froze because it was just too comfortable. It felt like being wrapped in the gentle embrace of Fox Immortal sister. Attendant picked up the spirit tablet and asked curiously, "Your Majesty, is this the cat tag you gave your new pet? The name you picked is awfully long." Great Immortal Dog's hit of heaven, earth, and the three realms. After puzzling over it for a while, Attendant suddenly realized heaven, earth, the three realms. I know the character for dog, so it's Great Immortal Dog's hit of heaven, earth, and the three realms. Then he turned around and mocked. How strange. Clearly your Majesty is raising a golden cat, so why give it a name related to dog poop? The instant he finished speaking, he took 2 punches to the face from the 2 of them, leaving 2 huge lumps on his head. Looking utterly miserable, Attendant staggered away. "It's time for dinner. This servant will go prepare it." Tu Lung sat by the table full of documents and glanced over, seeing Great Immortal sitting there sighing. Tiger, looking delighted, she picked up a book and moved closer to Great Immortal, repeating, "Great Immortal Dog's hit. There are many things I don't understand. I was just about to ask you. For example, you and the state preceptor stole the Imperial Tutor's lifespan and the Dan clan's good fortune. What exactly were you trying to do?" At that, Great Immortal was stunned. How did she know? Great Immortal jumped up in shock. Tu Lung poked it and said, "You don't need to worry about how I know. You only need to know that I do know, and that you didn't want me to know about it." Seeing Great Immortal begin trembling under her words, Tu Lung smiled in satisfaction and added, "In order for us to communicate, starting today, Great Immortal Dog's Hit will learn 10 characters a day." Hearing that was like a bolt from the blue for Great Immortal, whose eyes filled with tears. If he studied for 100 days, he could speak human words. This is today's lesson. Let's begin. The book Tu Lung handed over was a children's primer from ancient times. As she spoke, she also took out an incense burner and a bundle of incense, forcing Great Immortal to his knees. "Once you finish today's characters, I will personally burn incense for you." She had thought Great Immortal would be overjoyed at the mention of incense, but instead he sat there in a daze. "I regret this. Li Zhongxing never made me study. What kind of devotee worships an immortal like this?" Meanwhile, Tu Lung lifted a stick of incense and held it over the lamp flame. The fragrance spread through the room, making Great Immortal's eyes sparkle from how good it smelled. His power returned. As if immersed in magic, Great Immortal floated up, and then the fox immortal form appeared. Tu Lung stared blankly, not understanding what was happening. Great Immortal turned into a white fox. Your Fox Immortal filter has been recharged. This immortal is cute again. He thought Tu Lung would be pleased, but instead she shrieked at once. Change back. Right now. Immediately. Turn back for me at once. So startled by her reaction, Great Immortal had no choice but to change back into the tiger form. Tu Lung grabbed Great Immortal tightly and glared at him. Your original form is majestic and imposing. Tiger Immortals look down on Fox Immortals, Willow Immortals, Snake Immortals, Yellow Weasel Immortals. Hedgehog spirits, Earth Immortals, Flying Immortals. Hearing this, Great Immortal was moved and asked, "You don't dislike me for being a Fox Immortal?" At that moment, Tu Lung only smiled softly, thinking of her former self from another world. A fierce, brave woman like me suits a mount like you perfectly. Great Immortal did not understand, but his eyes still sparkled. Although I don't understand, she must be praising my martial valor. A tiger dies for one who truly knows it. From now on, this immortal will protect you. Only then did Tu Lung smile in satisfaction. Good. From a savage tiger to an obedient one. In just a moment, Great Immortal threw himself into studying characters. Writing is so hard, but for my devout believer, I'm willing to do anything. After that, she went to the table and picked up the neatly folded book. Next, there are still things about this world that I don't understand, so tonight I'll read a little later. Tu Lung sat calmly reading at the cluttered table, but after only a few words, her mind was already filled with images of the imperial tutor. The way he looked when he was deep in thought, the sincerity in his distant gaze, the gentleness with which he looked at her. Elsewhere, in a small room, the tall, slender figure of the imperial tutor was seen from behind as he hung that cloak up high to air out. He even gently brought his nose close to the cloak, as if savoring her scent. But from that romantic, yearning scene, the imperial tutor was soon forced to face something terrifying. Alone, he covered his face. Disgusting. Dan Track, you shameless cur. Her father once saved your life. He entrusted his daughter to you, yet you toy with her like this. But then a gentle voice said, "So what? I'm no longer a little girl. I've already become a woman. Besides, I gave myself to him. I only want to stay by Sir's side." At that moment, the imperial tutor's mind kept echoing with Tu Lung's words, making him frown in pain. "My feelings for you are genuine, sir. Tell me, sir." Only then did the imperial tutor stare at his own palms. In another scene, the night outside was dark and gloomy. Black crows perched on tree branches, and torchlight flickered below. A group of subordinates was transporting a corpse wrapped in white cloth, whispering among themselves. What a pity. This time I didn't find any important clues. It was cleaned up too thoroughly. One of them said, "Hurry up. Stop chatting. After we finish cleaning up tonight, the Guilon guards still have to go report to the imperial tutor on orders. Those people are practically inhuman." On the plank they carried lay the corpse of a pale-faced woman and a newborn baby. Poisoning a pregnant woman was bad enough, but they didn't even spare the newborn child. They kept whispering to one another, "Because someone tried to harm Her Majesty the Empress, they've all gone mad. If we don't find the person behind this soon, Dai Ung will never know peace." They had no idea that a little demon hidden behind them had heard every word. With a troubled look, she spoke to Li Zhongxing, who was nearby drinking heavily. "Sir, we're still this close to the capital. What if Great Immortal Dogshit comes looking for us?" But she only grew more anxious when Li Zhongxing said, "Miss Jianpa, do you have so little confidence? Your demonic aura has already been completely concealed. Besides, just in case." As he spoke, he took another swig of wine. Li Zhongxing Siga, I should still stay invisible. Don't worry. In the frightening night scene of the desolate forest, the corpse was placed on the ground. One subordinate drew his sword. "Right, just to be safe, let's give it one slash." The next instant, blood splattered everywhere, making the young woman cry out. That made them hear something, and they immediately turned around. Another man ran over and asked, "What's wrong?" but not wanting to alarm anyone, he replied, "Nothing." A moment later, they sat there talking again. "Strange. I clearly heard something." But the other hurriedly brushed it off. "That wasn't anything, probably just snoring. Our master likes wild greens best." Hearing such a foolish remark, the young woman could only sigh and shake her head. Pig-nose greens, a specialty of Shu, also called spring roll greens. Then that subordinate said, "Come on, we still have to go see the imperial tutor." Just as he was about to pluck a leaf, he unwillingly shouted, "Wait, I want to pick this leaf and bring it back for hot pot." Actually, the root is really delicious too. Seeing him act like this, the young woman dropped to her knees and cried in utter despair. Just then, Li Zhongxing came over and patted her head comfortingly. "Don't cry, Miss Jianpa. Pull yourself together. They've gone. Let's go over there." Jianpa stared blankly at the dark sky lit by the bright moon. Then she went with Li Zhongxing to the place with the two planks surrounded by skulls. Li Zhongxing then used magic, and in an instant the corpses suddenly stood upright. They lined up before him, all of them little demons. Zhongxing bowed respectfully. "Thank you all, immortals, for joining in and helping. Now that it's done, this poor Taoist is deeply grateful." As he spoke, he signaled to Miss Jianpa, and she brought over a box. When she opened it, it was full of glowing, precious items. All those immortals' eyes lit up at once. They immediately rushed forward to claim them. "Mine, this one's mine. Mine." Elsewhere, in a quiet and deserted courtyard, rows of subordinates dressed in black stood in formation. The imperial tutor stood before them, holding a map in his hand. A subordinate reported, "My lord, the 20 elite soldiers you requested have all been assembled." Hearing that, the imperial tutor folded up the map and ordered, "Depart for the southern border immediately." In the bright, moonlit night, the cold-faced group set out into the endless mountain ranges. From afar, Zhongxing had already seen it. Looking through a spyglass, Diempa said, "Sir, that seems to be the imperial tutor. Her Majesty has only just ascended the throne. So why is he leaving the capital at a time like this?" Zhongxing only smiled. If he doesn't leave the capital, how would this poor Taoist ever get what he wants? Hearing that, Diempa looked puzzled and asked blankly, "Didn't you already take 30 years of the imperial tutor's lifespan and the Dan clan's 1,000-year fortune?" But Zhongxing only gave her a calculating look and let out a cold laugh. Outside, the leaves on the trees had already turned yellow. In the room, attendant was helping Tu Lung adjust her robes when a subordinate came to report, "Your Majesty, the imperial tutor left the capital overnight for the southern border. He specifically sent this servant to inform you." Hearing that, Tu Lung froze and turned around wide-eyed. "What? The imperial tutor left the capital last night?" She began frowning as she speculated. "Dan Trak is a key military minister of Dayong. He is my imperial tutor. Without an order, he cannot leave the capital. The southern border? What sort of place is that? What's he going there for? Is he trying to rebel?" The thought made Tu Lung clench her hand. One would think she was furious, yet instead she smiled, her eyes full of calculation. "Didn't I tell him not to act rashly? Yet he spent the whole night doing this for me." Hearing this, the subordinate felt his horizons broaden. "Your Majesty is wise. Among the many ministers of Dayong, when it comes to loyalty, the imperial tutor ranks first." But he cannot guess what Tu Lung was really thinking. Loyalty? I knew that long ago. I thought he was loyal to the sovereign and devoted to his ruler. Even while attendants stood beside her adjusting her clothes, he reminded her, "Your Majesty, dress carefully." Tu Lung remained pensive, her gaze distant as she thought. He even traded away his lifespan and offered up his luck. Perhaps he colluded with the state preceptor to deceive me. Then the subordinate took out a small sachet. "Right, Your Majesty." Before the imperial tutor departed, he ordered this servant to personally deliver this to you. When Tu Lung opened it and took out what was inside, it was a tiger tally. Attendant immediately exclaimed, "Your Majesty, it's actually a tiger tally. Does the imperial tutor mean to hand military authority over to Your Majesty?" "Why so suddenly?" There was also a letter with it. Tu Lung unfolded it and read the words written inside. It said, "Your Majesty may execute without prior report. With the tiger tally in hand, none will dare disobey." Something felt wrong. Thinking of the image of the imperial tutor sitting there intently writing this letter for her, Tu Lung was suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. "Why does my heart suddenly feel tight?" Her small hand slowly clenched around the handwritten letter. The feeling was very strange, and her eyes held a trace of sorrow. "Imperial tutor, Did he say when he would return? The subordinate replied at once, reporting to your majesty, a trip to the southern border and back, plus handling affairs there, will take at least 1 month. Then Tu Lung said with firm eyes, I have only just ascended the throne, and the dynasty is not yet stable. This matter must not be leaked. From now on, announce that the imperial tutor is on sick leave. I permit him to remain at home, recovering for 3 months. No one is allowed to disturb him. Outside, the bright moon hung high while the wind rustled softly. At the Empress Dowager's palace, laughter could already be heard from outside. Her Majesty and the imperial tutor have finally fallen out. What young girl doesn't long for love? When the imperial tutor told me to wait for his return, he must have already expected this day. Her Majesty still remembers the grace between teacher and student. She called it recovery from illness instead of confinement, and even ordered that he not contact the outside. It's obvious Her Majesty is already very displeased with him. A huge golden roasted pig was turning over the red fire, and around it sat court officials, each with a knife in hand, eating and chatting merrily with the Empress Dowager. Her Majesty has grown up. She can no longer be treated as a little girl. That's right. Dan Track has long held sway over the court. Her Majesty is the first one unwilling to indulge him. Lord Zhao, holding up a fork with a huge piece of meat on it, said excitedly, That's right. I heard the state preceptor was also forced away by the imperial tutor. I heard it was because the state preceptor and Her Majesty were close, and the imperial tutor grew jealous. In the middle of their revelry, a maid suddenly came to report. Reporting to Your Highness the Empress Dowager, news has arrived from outside the palace. Just now, Her Majesty left the palace and personally went to the Dan residence to visit the sick. Hearing that, the officials who had been biting into their meat all froze and nearly choked. The Empress Dowager, still holding her chopsticks, forced a smile. It seems all of you have overthought things. How could teacher and student have any personal grudge? Her Majesty trusts the imperial tutor. Even I must give him some face. Elsewhere, Tu Lung arrived with attendant and the steward. All right, attendant, you and the steward may withdraw. Sitting calmly in a chair, Tu Lung explained, My coming to the Dan residence to visit the sick is only for outsiders to see. I'll remain in the imperial tutor's room for 1 watch, then return to the palace. Attendant cheerfully agreed. Understood. If Your Majesty gets tired, you can lie down on the bed and rest. But Tu Lung was displeased. How could the bed of an unmarried man be a place a woman like me could casually borrow to sleep in? Then she smiled and waved her hand. I'll go in first, then. After the two of them left, Tu Lung fell, silent once more. Looking at the empty room around her, she let out a sigh. From inside to outside, this whole room was filled with the imperial tutor's presence. It was as if, at this moment, Tu Lung recalled when the imperial tutor had stood intimately by her side, wrapping his arms around her from behind and calling softly, Your Majesty. And that wasn't all. He had leaned close to her ear and whispered gently, Lung. At the thought, Tu Lung blushed furiously and shouted, This is bad. Then she suddenly froze at a noise. What is that? Right beneath where she was sitting, the wooden floor began to crack open little by little. Startled, Tu Lung grabbed tightly at both sides. Hey, I nearly fell. A hidden chamber opened right before her eyes. Why would the imperial tutor build a secret room in his own bedchamber? After that, Tu Lung curiously went inside. But what shocked her most was the chamber was filled with paintings of Tu Lung from childhood to adulthood. In the dark room, Tu Lung stood there in silence, staring at a portrait of her younger self hanging by the window frame. Did anyone understand how I feel after discovering this hidden chamber? In the painting was a Tu Lung who was innocent and bright, someone who could smile at the simple things around her. But now, I feel like a thief stealing a love that does not belong to me, and at the same time like someone who has lost something, lost the most precious part of my past. In the dark, Tu Lung absent-mindedly lifted her gaze upward, sorrow filling her eyes. I truly envy the Tu Lung of this life. Her smile was so sweet, her eyes so pure. Tu Lung drifted in thought. Her hand lightly brushed over the painting of her younger self, smiling brilliantly. Back then, Tu Lung must have been loved to look like that, to smile that much. My past life never knew such a thing. Right now, all that remains beside me is my own shadow behind me. All I have is. Returning to reality, a young Tu Lung, small and panicked, cried out, "Mother!" Her mother was standing in the middle of a gate that was slowly closing. Try to push her inside. Alung, go to Rome as a hostage princess in mother's place. Mother must stay in Dayang because there is something more important I have to do. Then the gate slammed shut, and only an echo remained. Mother promises you, when I ascend the throne, I will definitely bring you back to Dayang. Little Tu Lung could only stand behind that towering gate, pounding on it and screaming, "Mother!" Tears streamed down her face, her terrified expression like that of any child being torn away from her mother forever, as she cried out, "Mother, I don't want to go. Mother, don't abandon me." What followed were bitter, miserable days. Everything became chaotic. Tu Lung, stubborn and unwilling to accept it, only knew how to react by biting. Loud shouting rang out. That mad dog, Tu Lung, bit someone again. Wasn't just tearing up the trash you wrote. "Let go, you lunatic. Keep acting crazy and we'll kill you." Amid curses and rough shoving, she was flung hard to the side. Get lost. At that moment, Tu Lung could only crouch there in grievance and despair. Life had turned dark for her. In another scene, in the imperial court, standing before the emperor were a mother and her 2 children, including Tu Lung. Beside them was a DAC, rubbing at his tearful eyes with both hands. The consort spoke in a grieved complaint. "Your Majesty, they have the same father and mother. I raised a DAC with my own hands. In what way is he inferior to the eldest princess? Why won't you establish a DAC as a royal heir?" In another chaotic scene, an older Tu Lung appeared in red armor. Morning sunlight over the palace shone across the vast tiled roofs, with rolling mountains in the distance. In the room, the close attendant was standing before a memorial tablet, holding 3 sticks of incense in his hand, while beside him the little tiger was brimming with energy. Even so, when he turned and saw Tu Lung's condition, he sighed. "Ever since returning from the Dan residence, Your Majesty has missed the imperial tutor so much she's become ill. She can't eat well and can't sleep peacefully." Hearing that, the little tiger immediately piped up. That old man. At that moment, Tu Lung still looked radiant and beautiful, but there was sorrow and regret in her eyes. She held the book in her hands and stared at it intently. "But, Your Majesty, you've been holding that book for half a shurchun without turning a page." The old tiger hurriedly explained. So that old man's love wasn't one-sided after all. Suddenly the attendant seemed to realize something, then turned back and clasped his hands in earnest plea. That night, the wind rustled outside, the moon hung high, and the room was pitch dark with the lamps extinguished. The great immortal stood before that grand bed. His eyes lit up at the sight of Tu Lung's exquisitely beautiful sleeping face. Immediately, the great immortal used the fur in his hand to cast a spell around Tu Lung. A beast immortal must cultivate spiritual arts. Dream sending. Unexpectedly, right afterward, Tu Lung entered a dream. She was dressed in red garments patterned with ornate designs, standing in the middle of a room in confusion and muttering to herself. "Back here again? This is a dream." Curious, Tu Lung stepped forward and lifted the curtain. The scene before Tu Lung left her utterly stunned, eyes wide and mouth agape as she asked, "What?" But the imperial tutor paid no attention to anything around him. He continued striking his back hard enough to draw blood as he shouted, "Her Majesty is not someone you may harbor improper thoughts about." He had become disheveled, his face full of sorrow. The imperial tutor hurriedly turned around and saw Tu Lung. Realizing she had heard everything, he flushed with embarrassment. "Your Majesty." But then he lowered his head again in anguish. "I told you before, do not appear in my dreams again. Otherwise, even I do not know how I might harm you." But Tu Lung stepped closer from behind and lifted his chin with her hand. "Then may I ask, sir, how exactly would you harm me?" In the dark, desolate room, the paintings hanging all around swayed loosely in the wind. There were only the 2 of them. Dressed in red, Tu Lung tilted up the imperial tutor's chin. Then he clenched his teeth, grabbed Tu Lung's wrist, and yanked her into his arms. The imperial tutor, startled by her reaction, quickly lowered his head and kissed her tightly on the lips, pinning her hand down firmly. And so, in that dark and lonely room, with the painting still fluttering in the wind, there came an intimate murmur. A lung, "I." The next morning at the southern border, birds were basking on the branches. Under the tree, Two disciples sat by a brazier, roasting food while discussing things. Once we pass the gate of life and death ahead, we'll reach the southern border. That's right. Hopefully we can successfully find the immortal medicine. So there they were, eating beside the large fire pit while frowning and chatting. It's said that on Pung Island lives an immortal unlike any the world has ever seen, with a savage temperament. The fellow disciple beside him said, "With the imperial tutor leading us, why should I be afraid of him? Is that why you're so insistent on making braised pork?" They kept chatting back and forth at ease. What they didn't know was that above the tree canopy, a tightly wrapped figure sat with folded arms, having heard everything. As soon as they looked up, they recognized it. Holding the fallen mask, they said, "Imperial tutor, your mask fell off." But the imperial tutor could not care less about them now. He was filled only with fury, hatred in his eyes, scratches all over his face, teeth clenched tight. "How dare you?" Every single one hit the same exact spot as before. Behind her came the cheers of the great immortal and the attendant. "Amazing! Your Majesty's archery has improved again." One would have thought Tu Lung would be pleased. But instead, she merely turned and cast them a cold, indifferent stare, making both of them straighten in alarm. The attendant quickly turned to snap at the great immortal. "What kind of magic did you use on Her Majesty exactly? Why do I feel her mood is even worse today?" The great immortal was baffled too. "I clearly let them meet in a dream." While the two of them shifted blame back and forth, Tu Lung quietly set down the bow and covered her mouth thoughtfully with one hand. "When I fought on the battlefield, the bow I used was the 5-stone bow. This body can draw a 5-stone bow 10 times in succession. It seems that back then, I did not neglect martial training just because I held a high position. Your Majesty's martial arts were personally taught by the imperial tutor. And when the imperial tutor was young, he was also Dai Ung's #1 fierce general, capable of using a 10-stone bow." As he spoke, imagining that fair-skinned, powerfully muscled body, the attendant became so delighted he couldn't help exclaiming, "Besides, wow." At that moment, Tu Lung's eyes suddenly reddened, and her hands awkwardly spread apart. A 10-stone bow. The imperial tutor's strength really is astonishing. When she recalled that intimate moment, in the end she had no choice but to kick him away with her foot. Stop for a second." Only then did the attendant and the great immortal stare in utter shock, huddling together and trembling. Tu Lung, carrying an imposing aura, glared fiercely and shouted, even if it was a dream, I should still have been the one in control." The attendant and the great immortal still had no idea what had happened and could only exchange baffled looks. A dream? Outside, the sun was already blazing high in the sky. In the crowded court, officials came before Tu Lung to seek an audience. "Your Majesty, these memorials are urgent matters that need to be handled." As soon as one finished speaking, several other officials noisily followed up. "The imperial tutor is resting and recovering from illness. This humble official dares not decide on his own. We ask for Your Majesty's instruction. Your Majesty, regarding this month's flood in Shu Prefecture. Your Majesty, the locust plague in Qing Prefecture for 3 consecutive years." Faced with the barrage of petitions, Tu Lung looked bewildered, her face full of shock as she stammered, "Then, submit them. I'll read them." The moment she finished speaking, pushing and shoving broke out below. The officials crowded each other in their rush to go first. "Mine first. I came first. Mine is more urgent." Those behind refused to yield and grabbed sleeves, shoving others aside. "My matter concerns lives." After a while, a hand buried in the pile of documents raised a little flag high, signaling for them to stop. It turned out to be Tu Lung, submerged in the mountain of files. The officials below stared at her in astonishment. One volume was on Tu Lung's head, one in her hand, and another stack was piled on the table. As soon as she opened one, she nearly went mad and shouted, "The imperial tutor has only been absent from court for a few days, and this much work has piled up? This much? How am I supposed to finish reading all of it?" Right afterward, she asked a question that made the officials turn pale and tremble. "Don't I still have 4 regent ministers? Are they not working anymore?" Tu Lung immediately flew into a rage, slamming one hand heavily onto the table as she shouted, "Speak!" Her face was tight with anger, her eyes glaring, her arms crossed over her chest. To soothe her fury, one official raised his hand and answered in a shaky voice. This humble official dares to say, in the past, for matters like these, the imperial tutor never allowed the four ministers to interfere. Though he looked flustered on the outside, inside he was actually overjoyed. Dun thrat. Your good days have finally come to an end. For all these years, you have ruled with absolute power and suppressed everyone else. Recalling what had happened at his residence, he had once ordered his subordinates, take advantage of his illness and kill him. Since he has already left the court, don't let him have the chance to come back. His subordinate had accepted the order at once. Please rest assured, my lord, this subordinate will act according to circumstances. And now, seeing that Tu Lung was angry at the imperial tutor, he felt even more pleased with himself and secretly rejoiced. If your majesty has already ascended the throne and taken power, how can she allow someone else to monopolize authority? But unexpectedly, Tu Lung was angry on the imperial tutor's behalf. Her face was full of indignation, glaring and gritting her teeth. Her hands pounded the table as she shouted, "That does make sense. The imperial tutor actually let them idle around, freeloading, drawing salaries without doing any work." The official was immediately flustered. Your Majesty, your focus is mistaken. Elsewhere, a table had been prepared with delicacies from land and sea. The dishes were attractively colored and piping hot. Reporting to your highness, the residences of the four ministers have sent replies. Tonight, none of them will be able to come. The Empress Dowager then asked, did they explain why not? The palace maid replied tensely, I heard that today, your majesty suddenly summoned all four ministers, placing great trust in them. They still have not left court yet. Hearing that, the Empress Dowager suddenly looked sorrowful, holding her chopsticks as she stared at the banquet table, because her dining companions were gone. In another scene, the sharp smack of a ruler struck the edge of a table. The officials were seated before heaps of documents, scribbling and writing. In the middle of them stood Tu Lung with a ruler in her hand, pacing back and forth as she supervised with a crisp voice. Pull yourselves together. Work diligently for me. At the same time, the great immortal was also burning with enthusiasm, sitting there writing away as if determined not to lose to mere mortals. In the tense atmosphere, the close attendant entered with a worried expression. Your Majesty, matters of governance are no small thing. Are you truly not going to wait until the imperial tutor returns before deciding? If you do this, won't people think that your Majesty wants to divide the imperial tutor's authority? Unexpectedly, after hearing this, Tu Lung showed not the slightest fear and instead smiled as she said, a loyal hound and a vicious servant. Within my heart, I know exactly what I'm doing. As for certain officials, if they're already drawing my salary, then naturally I will send them to work. While those officials, unfed and unwatered, were still straining to read and write, words continued to ring out inside. If the waters of Tsanglang River are clear, they may be used to wash my cap strings. If the waters of Tsanglang River are muddy, they may be used to wash my feet. The three strategies for river control. Lord Gao, are you also concerned with handling Shu Prefecture's flood disaster? Immediately afterward, Lord Gao stepped forward and presented his proposed plan for Tu Lung to review. This subject dares to offer your Majesty a strategy for resolving it. Tu Lung took it and, after reading, declared, first, in flood control, it is better for floodwaters to flow than to remain blocked. The best strategy is to dredge and regulate the river. The middle strategy is to build canals to divert the water. The lowest strategy is to reinforce the dikes. Lord Gao's proposal, however, is merely commonplace. Does Lord Gao have any higher insight? After that, Lord Gao explained the details more clearly to Tu Lung. Reporting to your Majesty, Shu Prefecture's flooding was caused by the breach of the Yaoyao River Dike. Shu Prefecture. This subject has reviewed historical records and annual reports. Only then did I discover that on average, the Yaoyao River suffers 2 dike breaches every 3 years, and once every 100 years it changes course. At that moment, Lord Gao suddenly turned his gaze to Tu Lung and asked, does your Majesty know why? Tu Lung no longer wore the stern expression from before. Instead, she suddenly became gentle. I am all ears. Then Tu Lung and Tang Tan seemed to turn into obedient students. Please teach me, Master Gao. Like a strict teacher holding a pencil, Lord Gao said. In fact, before the imperial court was established, the land in the upper reaches of the Yaoyao River was still grazing land for livestock. Although Shu Prefecture had the threat of flooding, it was not frequent, and the waters of the Yaoyao River were once so clear you could see the bottom. It was only after other tribes migrated here and began farming the land, less than 800 years ago, that the region became troubled. Thus, there is barren, and when the Yaoyao River flows through it, fertile silt is carried downstream into Shu Prefecture. But Shu Prefecture is a vast, open land, so the river slows there. The silt from upstream accumulates there year after year, gradually raising the riverbed until the Yaoyao River became a suspended river. That thin, fragile dike can barely hold back the current, while black storm clouds bear down directly on it. The moment a strong wind comes and the suspended river breaks through the dike, it will flood 1,000 li and plunge the people into misery. Hearing this, Tu Lung was deeply struck and exclaimed, I understand Lord Gao's meaning now. Controlling the silt is the way to control the floodwaters at present. After that, Tu Lung handed the records to Lord Gao. Then this matter shall be entrusted to you for supervision, my beloved minister. Lord Gao was overwhelmed with emotion. This subject obeys. Then Lord Gao turned away, his eyes blazing. Someone who discovers talent is even more precious than talent itself. I will give everything for your majesty at all costs. But inwardly, he was rejoicing because his majesty had actually called him my beloved minister. Meanwhile, Tong Tan stood behind them with a puzzled expression, muttering to himself, a loyal hound, or a vicious servant. I think I understand now. That night, at the southern border, beneath the pitch-black sky, the great immortal used his invisibility spell to slip into the tents. The imperial tutor slowly opened his eyes. With his clothes half fastened and half loose, he walked toward Tu Lung from behind. Tu Lung was bent over a desk piled high with books. He wondered, this is Your Majesty's dream. Tu Lung suddenly froze, and the hand that had been writing abruptly stopped. Her face flushed red the moment she saw him. Alung, from behind, he wrapped his arms around her waist and rubbed his face against her shoulder. Then he whispered in her ear, We've met again in a dream. Unexpectedly, Tu Lung brushed his hand aside and said in a gentle voice, Sir has come again. I intend to make use of 4 men, Zhao, Chun, Gao, and Gu. Does Sir have any thoughts on this? Before she could finish speaking, the imperial tutor suddenly seized Tu Lung's wrist, pulled her fully into his embrace, and said, People may be truly wicked, but ministers are neither wholly good nor wholly bad. As long as your majesty knows how to employ your ministers and place them where they belong, they can all become useful subjects. Then he kissed her with deep passion. At that moment, Tu Lung secretly thought, I never expected, sir, though a man, to be so learned and insightful. In that dim room wrapped in black night, the two of them remained entwined, while Tu Lung's thoughts drifted. No, perhaps all men possess talents, intelligence, and learning no less than women's. Yet in that world I once visited, where women were honored and men were belittled, men were still bound inside the home by childbearing and the codes of virtue and propriety. Just like most women in this era, shackled by the virtues expected of wives, trapped in the inner residence from the moment they are born, giving birth and raising children for men. Tu Lung suddenly jolted when the imperial tutor pressed her down, one of her hands landing against his firm chest. With a stern expression, the imperial tutor said, Your Majesty, do not lose focus. In that hazy room, upon the warm bed, the imperial tutor held Tu Lung tightly as they slept. And so it went until the next morning, when birds chirped among the flowering branches and sunlight streamed through the window lattice. Tu Lung was still immersed in sleep when she suddenly opened her eyes. At once, Tu Lung sat bolt upright and threw back the covers to look underneath. Then she cried out in shock. Tong Tan, who was carrying a bowl of medicine nearby, came hurrying over in confusion. He came over and said, Your Majesty, you're awake. Tu Lung, flustered and embarrassed, said, "Remake the bed for me." A while later, Tu Lung sat at the table eating breakfast. At the same time, she checked on the Great Immortal. "Your handwriting has improved, Great Immortal. Today, I'm giving you half a day off. You may arrange your own time. If you lack money, have Tong Tong burn some for you." The tiny Great Immortal stared blankly at Tu Lung as she ate with quiet grace. The believer's mood seems much better. Could my dream-sending spell really be this effective? Thinking this, the Great Immortal was delighted. I must keep working hard. On the other side, Tong Tong followed Tu Lung's order and remade the bed linens. As he worked, he grumbled, "Your Majesty, you're already a grown young lady, and you still wet the bed?" Tu Lung, who had just taken a sip of tea, spat it out and shouted angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? I stayed up late, drank some water, and accidentally spilled a cup onto the bed. That's all." She had thought she could fool Tong Tong, but he only pretended to accept her explanation. Even while hanging the sheets out to dry, he still wore a mocking expression. So it was just like last time, getting up in the middle of the night to drink water. Wait, at that thought, Tong Tong truly froze in shock. Half an hour later, the imperial physician arrived and stroked his beard thoughtfully as he entered the room. Tu Lung looked at him in surprise. "Tang Tang, I'm not you. Why did you summon the imperial physician?" Tong Tong, like a mother worrying over her daughter, planted his hands on his hips and replied, "Your Majesty, haven't you been getting up frequently at night to drink water lately, and even spilling it onto the bed?" Tu Lung answered calmly, "That's right." At once, Tong Tong flew into a rage, glaring as he shouted, "Then that's exactly it. You mustn't hide your illness. I thought it over. Dropping cups means weak hands. Waking at night so often means frequent urination, and drinking water means your throat dries easily." At this point, Tong Tong's eyes brimmed with tears as he said, "Even if it's an incurable disease." Then tears streamed down his face as he spoke and wiped them away. "I'll still do everything I can to find a physician who can cure you." Faced with this scene, Tu Lung was helpless. "Why can't I understand a single word you're saying?" The imperial physician then took Tu Lung's pulse by the bed. "Chief Attendant Tong Tong is overthinking things. At your Majesty's age, it can only be a minor ailment at worst. May I ask if lately your Majesty has been suffering from insomnia, irritability, internal heat, and sweating at night?" Tu Lung found it an exact match for herself. "Yes, exactly." Upon hearing that, the imperial physician immediately understood. He raised his fan to cover his mouth and sighed. "Ah, youth." After that, he prescribed a bottle of pills, 3 pills a day, to strengthen the kidneys. From then on, Tong Tong dutifully brought the medicine to her every day. Tu Lung merely sat there and popped the pills in her mouth one by one with a gloomy expression. Seeing this, Tong Tong nagged again, "Your Majesty, take them with water." Meanwhile, Tu Lung thought to herself, "Has anything unusual happened recently? I keep having dreams, and in them I see the imperial tutor and even do those things." She picked up the bowl, drank the water, and then thought back to her previous life. "If this were my former life, I would already have summoned the state preceptor into the palace to exorcise evil. Could it be?" Immediately, she turned to look at the Great Immortal, who was staring wide-eyed at the pile of valuables stacked before him. One eye reddened. Tu Lung moved behind the Great Immortal and said in a chilling voice, "So it was you, Great Immortal." The Great Immortal, who was hugging 2 bundles of fine chopsticks, was suddenly lifted up from behind by Tu Lung. "I caught you." The Great Immortal was stunned. "I'm finished." His concealed form had been exposed. Tu Lung lowered her face close to his and glared. "Act cute later. Tell me now, have these strange dreams I've been having lately been your doing?" The accusation struck right at the truth, leaving the Great Immortal flustered. "Well, this. So it really was? No need to be polite. Just treat that palace incense thief as my gift of thanks." Hearing that, Tu Lung froze and stammered, which means, "The imperial tutor is also having erotic dreams, just like I am." Seeing Tu Lung panic, both hands covering her flushed face, the Great Immortal cried out excitedly, "Erotic dreams?" Then Tu Lung sat down again, resting her chin on one hand and thought, "Wait, for me, this might actually be a good thing. The great immortal, still looking thrilled, urged, "Tell me more." Tu Lung remained contemplative. "After all, I know these are dream omens, but the imperial tutor does not. If those ministers dare deceive me." Holding a figurine of one of those ministers in her hand, Tu Lung wore a wicked expression as she rubbed it between her fingers. "As long as I dream, I can confront the imperial tutor directly. And besides, no matter what I say to him in the dream, he can't possibly suspect me." The great immortal was trembling in fear when she suddenly turned around and shouted, "Great immortal." Then she came closer with a smile and said, "This believer has a favor to ask." In the solemn imperial court, Tu Lung sat on the throne in her dragon robe. "Regarding the locust disaster in Qing Prefecture, do any of my ministers still have a strategy?" The officials below, standing in neat rows, replied, "Reporting to your majesty, this subject has a proposal." Just as Lord Chun was enthusiastically presenting his memorial, Tong Tan suddenly came rushing in from nowhere, panting. "It's here, Lord Chun. The things you ordered this subordinate to prepare have all been brought." Then he went around offering them to each court official. "Please." The ministers each ended up holding a skewer in their hands, all of them looking utterly bewildered. Lord Chun then explained, "What you do not know is that this subject's beloved concubine comes from Qing Prefecture. She once endured the locust plague and the grain shortage there. Back then, in order to fill their stomachs, she and her family caught locusts to eat. First boil them, then roast them. I've heard that once roasted, the meat is fresh and delicious like shrimp. This subject believes the government can post notices encouraging the people of Qing Prefecture to eat locusts, which would conveniently also solve the food shortage." Upon hearing that, the court officials immediately gagged and retched. Tu Lung was no exception. Grimacing, she covered her mouth and handed the skewer back to Ton Ton. Then the officials below burst into loud opposition. "No, this would not do. What if the people get sick after eating them? The common people revere them. They even build shrines and worship them like gods. If the court openly endorses the eating of these semi-divine creatures, I fear it will stir resentment among the people." Suddenly, one official blurted out, "If only Dai Ung had a divine beast protecting the nation, none of this would be happening." The moment he said it, the surrounding officials hurriedly tried to silence him. "Hey, don't speak nonsense." Immediately, the three men knelt and kowtowed before Tu Lung. "Your Majesty, forgive us. This subject absolutely did not mean to question the policies of the late emperor." Yet those words set Tu Lung thinking. Sitting on the throne with her chin propped on one hand, brows slightly furrowed, she thought, the imperial tutor said the same thing that day. In a plain room, the imperial tutor had stood before her and said, "As long as your Majesty chooses it as the divine beast, you may then do as you please." A demon immortal, the nation's guardian divine beast. A little later, in a courtyard thick with tall trees and blossoms, Tong Tan said, "His Majesty pitied the great immortal for being bored in the palace all day, so he especially ordered this subordinate to take the great immortal out for some fun." Tong Tan was holding the great immortal beside a bench, a book in one hand. The great immortal still looked dazed, as if unable to believe it. "I really don't have to copy characters today? I can even listen to opera all day." Tong Tan promptly held the book up in front of him and said in a machinoid tone, "That's right, great immortal. This subordinate even picked out the play for you." The great immortal was moved. "Good. This baby spirit hasn't read many books. You do it." Then Tong Tan pointed at the book. "How about this one? This play is about a fox immortal and a fox spirit who meet beneath the moonlight. Their love story has remained popular in the inner palace of Dai Ung for 500 years. Hearing that, the great immortal's eyes suddenly sparkled like stars, and his mouth fell open. Foxes, a spiritual cultivation clan. This is it." Elsewhere, a neatly arranged tea table stood with plates of pastries already set upon it. Still dressed in her dragon robe, Tu Lung sat on the throne. "As you four gentlemen can see, would it be better for Dai Ung to have a guardian divine beast, or better not to have one? There are no outsiders here today, so my lords may speak plainly. I guarantee that afterward I will not hold anyone accountable." The four gentlemen were stunned. Their eyes widened in puzzlement as they sat properly in their seats. One of them then spoke up. "May I ask why your Majesty is asking this?" Tu Lung said, "To be frank with all of you, I searched the entire palace library and could not find a single book recording anything about the guardian divine beast. Hearing this, the officials replied, "That is only natural. 20 years have passed in the blink of an eye. They were likely burned in the upheaval of the burning of the records." One official suddenly sighed. "Your Majesty is the ruler of a nation. The imperial tutor could not possibly have failed to tell you of something as important as the burning of the records." His gaze then became somewhat intimidating. "Others may not know, but your Majesty is a royal heir personally raised by the imperial tutor." Tu Lung thought to herself, "Is this man questioning me?" Then Tu Lung gave a cold smile and said, "Lord Zhao misunderstands. Sir once taught me that the greatest taboo for a sovereign is hearing only one side. It is precisely because I used to listen only to Sir that today I wish to hear the opinions of all my lords." After hearing that, the other three burst into laughter. "Well said. One should hear both sides. Your Majesty has the makings of a wise ruler. Whatever I know, I will tell without reserve." Seeing this, Tu Lung was also satisfied and said softly, "Many thanks." But inwardly, she was simmering. "So I was suspected after all? But I was reborn into this world from another life, and I have no memory whatsoever of this world before the age of 15. I cannot tell the imperial tutor that directly. Besides, the imperial tutor cherishes that little Tu Lung from before she turned 15. Thinking of herself in those red, embroidered robes, she mused, "I came from another world and have long forgotten the past. If he learns everything, can he still see me as the person he holds in his heart?" In a sunlit room, Tu Lung sat by the writing desk deep in thought. This world, aside from valuing men over women, differs in many ways from the worlds I once passed through. The book she was reading stated, "The realm had long been divided, with more than 200 great and small states coexisting. Among them, the 6 nations of Yun, Tang, Rong, Yulu, and Daiyang, due to their vast territories and great strength, styled themselves kingdoms. At the same time, this was also an age in which humans and demons lived side by side. Around the towering structures, demons lurked every day. The true ruler of the world was the sacred palace on Mount Joey, home to 100,000 divine beings. The supreme authority of the demon gods commanded all demon immortals under heaven, keeping peace and order in the mortal world. The price of this was that after a new king ascended the throne in the human realm, he had to journey to Mount Joey and offer tribute to the sacred palace. The emperor would present many offerings to the demon immortals, for only a son of heaven recognized by the sacred palace could pray for timely wind and rain on behalf of his people. The item the new emperor had to offer was his firstborn child, or, failing that, someone of noble blood to take their place. My honored royal father, the late emperor of Daiyang, Tu Han, stood before a great blaze and cruelly burned all those books. He was unwilling to trade his own child for divine protection, yet he also could not bear to let his people suffer under the torment of demons. So he abandoned the path into the territory of the immortals and instead chose a powerful demon, immortal there, who was qualified to form a bond. Thus, Daiyang became the only nation without a guardian divine beast. He even burned all the spirit compasses bestowed by the sacred palace, along with every book and document related to it, and decreed that Daiyang must never rely on the gods' prophetic guidance to govern the state. Reading the book, Tu Lung let out a weary sigh and thought, so this was the burning of the records 20 years ago. Since then, 8 calamities have plagued the land of Daiyang, and the people have not known a single day of peace. Then Tu Lung walked to the window and looked up. So Daiyang is the only nation under heaven that does not worship the gods. It seems that the father of this life, who allowed me, his daughter, to inherit the throne, left an expression of faint longing on her face. Becoming the first empress in history is therefore not so surprising. Then she turned back and sighed again. Even now, thinking of Lord Zhao's words, although Daiyang lost its guardian divine beast, obtaining a wise ruler is also the people's blessing. Lord Gao could only sigh as well. A pity he died young. Back then, when the Gu clan migrated to Daiyang, precisely because the late emperor loved the people as his own children, Lord Zhao also felt deep regret. But the late emperor offended the divine palace and brought many disasters upon the people of Daiyang as well. After thinking it over and over, The views of Zhao, Chun, Gao, and Gu all seemed reasonable in their own way. In the end, I might as well go to sleep and hear what the imperial tutor thinks. So Tu Lung lay comfortably on the bed and drifted off. Suddenly, the great immortal appeared, climbed onto her bed with an excited look, and then used a spell. Surprised? This spirit art can travel 1,000 miles. You can go to the southern frontier and meet the imperial tutor in person. Missing someone is no match for seeing them face to face, so there's no need to thank this treasure too much. In the pitch-black night, a savage red moon hung in the sky. At the gate of life and death, DM Lo had arrived with the Lord. As soon as he saw her, he reminded her, "Inside is extremely dangerous. Miss DM Lo, there is no need for you to go in there. This poor Taoist will return once I'm done." After saying that, the Lord walked inside, while DM Lo showed no doubt at all and merely folded her arms and nodded. "My lord, you must be careful." Then he pushed the gate open slightly, and at once streams of dark energy slithered out from within. Even so, he strode right into that black miasma, thinking to himself, it won't be easy. This poor Taoist has planned and schemed for 10 years. At last, the seal on this gate of life and death has been broken. At that thought, the Lord looked thrilled and satisfied, and red cracks began to spread across his face. It just so happened to coincide with the final limit of this chi vessel. Inside, crimson air sacs floated in the air. Before him stretched a fantastical, shimmering scene, a tranquil river glimmering with flickering lights, while mountain ranges rose one behind another in the distance. The Lord skimmed across the river's surface, where chunks of ice drifted chaotically atop the water. At that moment, with a red mark between his brows and a contemplative expression, the Lord approached an ice block, lifted it in his soaking wet hand, and smiled. "My treasure, are you willing to offer yourself to this poor Taoist?" A faint, gentle sound came from within the ice. What a lovely answer. At the same time, strange noises suddenly rang out in the distance. "Careful! Left side! The right is attacking!" From afar, the imperial tutor and his subordinates came rushing over. They used chains to bind the long-necked demon tightly and shouted, "Pull the chains! Tighten them!" The chains were wound even tighter. A masked subordinate gripped one end and yanked hard as he shouted, "Imperial tutor!" The next moment, the imperial tutor appeared with a long sword in hand. Dan Zhua charged forward and drove the blade straight into the chest of that long-necked demon with all his strength. But his eyes widened in shock. It was too hard. Then cracks began to spread. The demon's face warped, its mouth gaping wide, its forehead splitting with jagged fractures as it let out a furious howl. At the same time, it lashed out with dark energy, blasting aside those attacking it. Panic erupted. "It's gone mad. Protect the imperial tutor. Cover the imperial tutor." Everyone shouted in alarm. In contrast, Danjua remained calm. "I'm Fine. Be careful. Its blood is highly corrosive." Several members of the group had already been injured, but before the words had fully left his mouth, he froze. From somewhere came Tu Lung's panicked, shouting voice, "You dog-trailing bastard!" Then she crashed to the ground, her face twisted in pain, one hand clutching the bloody wound on her arm. Why does my injury hurt so much as if it were real, even though this is the imperial tutor's dream? Seeing her appear, the subordinates were all stunned and began asking one another, "Is that Her Majesty the Empress? Her Majesty cannot possibly appear in the southern frontier right now. That woman must be an illusion created by the strange beast. Everyone, stay alert and don't be fooled." But to their surprise, the imperial tutor rushed over with his sword and landed near Tu Lung, while a masked subordinate stood beside her. Covered in scratches, Tu Lung looked up with curious eyes and said, in the next instant, Danjua removed his face covering and handed it to her. Pressing it over her mouth as he spoke, he said, "Go. The southern frontier is no place for mortals to set foot. Put on this poison-proof mask, take the sword, and leave immediately." Hearing that, one might have expected Tu Lung to be frightened, but instead she asked in surprise, "Imperial tutor, don't you recognize me?" Only then did Danjua stiffen and stare at her, thinking it hasn't vanished. As expected, The sword clanged to the ground. He clearly knew this was an illusion, yet his body had rushed out of control all the same. To watch A Lung die before his eyes, he simply could not bear it, even if she was fake. Elsewhere, the great immortal was sitting leisurely on a table. The moment he saw Tu Lung appear, he asked, "You're back already? Were you two having that much fun?" Looking disheveled and half-dazed, Tu Lung demanded in shock, "What do you mean back already?" The great immortal froze. "Did I ruin your good time?" Tu Lung had already been through enough, and his twisted questioning finally made her lose her temper. She rushed over and smacked him several times on the rear. "What exactly are you doing? As punishment, you'll offer incense for a month." Hearing that, the great immortal burst into tears. "This treasure didn't mean to interrupt you too, but my cultivation can only sustain the temporary spirit link for one Shurchin." In the dark of night, those bright red air sacs still floated in the sky. The ground below was stained with blood, with several corpses strewn about. Danjua and a few of his subordinates were also wounded, leaving the demon corpses behind. Supporting one another, they withdrew. Danjua stood there in silence, staring at the small pearls in his palm. "A Lung, with these, I can save you now." As Danjua thought that, he clasped his hands and prayed with great hope. At that moment, the air sacs were growing larger and larger, and the dark energy around them thickened. He turned and warned his subordinates, "Now that the divine medicine has appeared, everyone withdraw from the gate of life and death at once. If we do not leave now, the things in the abyss below will awaken." As Danjua skimmed over the ice-filled lake, he suddenly noticed something. This feeling seemed strangely familiar. Spotting one block of ice very different from the others, Danjua approached and gently placed a hand on it. He frowned slightly, then dropped to one knee in excitement. "I've finally found you." This poor Taoist faded Nuchi vessel. Patting the glittering ice block, Danjua said, "My treasure, are you willing to offer yourself to this poor Taoist?" Inside, a long-haired girl curled around herself suddenly awakened from the noise. The cinnabar mark on her forehead made her frown in discomfort. "The inner core, it's so hot. My head hurts so much, as if my soul were being torn apart. This familiar feeling, is it?" She remembered her previous world. Standing before the new emperor, she held a small vial of medicine in her hand, while two subordinates beside her stood with clasped hands before an altar. "I pray to heaven and earth, to the 3 realms and the 10 directions, to the true masters above. Reveal the secrets of heaven to me and help me finally Zhongxing as soon as possible." Then she sank into thought again. Is it really Wang Long? The Empress of Dai died a month ago. In this world, only she alone remained. Who else would still be worthy of the name Wang Long? State Preceptor Li Lu was accused of presenting poisonous pills and causing the late emperor's death, clear evidence of guilt. She kept drifting through these thoughts while outside. The night was pitch black, and within that vast, magnificent hall, a subordinate came to deliver the order before her. "The new emperor has decreed, execute her without regard for the crime." At those words, she no longer felt fear or worry. Instead, she laughed loudly, as if she had long known this would happen. "If they want to pin the blame on me, could they possibly lack evidence?" Then she dissolved into a spell, leaving the two subordinates staring in shock, managing only to utter, "Little demon." Just like that, she merged into the spell, her eyes vacant and her voice growing weaker. "Tu Lung, you ruler and ministers, today I'll consider this my repayment to you." In an instant, she vanished. After crossing into another world, beneath a sky with a bright red air sac hanging above it, she stood in a river filled with ice flows, mountain ridges undulating in the distance. A trace of sadness crossed her face. Wang Long is the only chance to finally Zhongxing. If this world no longer has Wang Long, then I'll have to go to another world and look. As she spoke, she removed her clothes and then curled herself into a block of ice. This ice was larger and more dazzling than the others, so it quickly drew the Lord's attention. He came closer, lowering his voice in gentle temptation. "Be a good little demon now, then flash a sly smile. Open your hard shell." Instantly, the little demon burst out from inside the shell and seized his throat, making him grimace and grit his teeth. Only then was the Lord stunned when he saw that all too familiar face. The vacant eyes looking back at him belonged to Li Lu. Smiling, Lu Yi leaned close and whispered softly, Li Zhongxing, I finally found you. In the dark, bleak, freezing night before the gate of life and death, the guard on duty was shouting, wait, because Danjua's subordinates were trying to force their way in. Move aside. Stop blocking the way. If the strange beast of the southern frontier escapes from the gate of life and death, the whole realm will fall into chaos. They even brandished swords and axes in threat, but the little demon guarding the gate stubbornly refused. Struggling with all her might, she fought them off with her bare hands. No, you cannot seal the gate of life and death. Lord State Preceptor is still inside. At that moment, Danjua, standing behind them with a dragon orb in hand, spoke up. Do not be rude. I know this young lady. You are the maid serving at the State Preceptor's side, aren't you? It's very dangerous inside. Please step aside. One would have expected her to keep resisting, but upon recognizing Danjua, she grew flustered and speechless. Imperial tutor. Before she could recover, Li Zhongxing suddenly appeared from behind, shouting, Quick! Don't let her catch me! Seeing the State Preceptor emerge, the maid cried with relief, Lord State Preceptor. At the same time, the subordinates were left dumbfounded, mouths agape. The State Preceptor? Ignoring the commotion around him, the State Preceptor quickly ran out and shouted at Danjua, Why are you just standing there? Hurry and seal the gate of life and death. If that old monster gets out, even 10 of this poor Taoist wouldn't be enough to defeat her. Danjua, his face covered in wounds, stood there in thought with the dragon orb in his hand. The orb began to shine brighter. The next moment, he used his inner force to seal the gate of life and death shut, and all the magical artifacts gradually dissipated. But Danjua then dropped to one knee, unable to hold himself up. His subordinates rushed over in alarm. Imperial tutor, are you all right? Danjua frowned faintly and, utterly exhausted, said, I'm fine. We leave for the capital immediately. The next morning in the Imperial Palace, golden sunlight shone over the crimson roof tiles. Tu Lung was seated reading memorials when she was startled by the words, Tu Lung, your majesty is being foolish. Seeing how tense the situation was, Song Qing hurriedly explained, Your Majesty, please forgive him. Grand Preceptor Gao is already 90 this year. He has little time left. For the sake of how he once taught the late Emperor and Lord Imperial Tutor, please pretend you never heard the muddled words he just spoke. Though aware that he had misspoken, Grand Preceptor Gao still stood there proudly and let out a sigh. Pointing straight at Tu Lung, he said, Before the late Emperor passed away, he lay bedridden for 5 years. It was Danjua alone who held up a Dai Ung on the verge of collapse. If he had not stood against the criticism of court and commoners alike, purged the rot that had festered within for years, rectified taxation, replenished the treasury, guarded the southern frontier against the outer world, strengthened border defenses, and intimidated neighboring states, then I fear Dai Ung would already have become a target for all under heaven. Tu Lung's face remained expressionless, but inwardly she was brimming with pride, as expected of the man I chose. Hearing Grand Preceptor Gao's words, Song Qing was so alarmed that he immediately tried to stop him. My lord, please rest a moment. But Grand Preceptor Gao, even as he covered his mouth and coughed, forced himself to continue. Danjua shoulders everything and serves as ruler with his whole heart. Yet your majesty suspended him from office for more than a month simply because of selecting a husband. Tu Lung looked as though she were being cursed to her face. She folded her arms across her chest, her expression blank, though inwardly she was secretly laughing. The late emperor's corpse is barely cold, and yet his trusted ministers are being humiliated like this. But Grand Preceptor Gao still wasn't done. Pointing at Tu Lung again, he loudly scolded her, though with some exaggeration. Tu Lung, how are you any different from a foolish tyrant? As the atmosphere grew more and more strained, Song Qing gasped, covered his mouth, and cried out, Your Majesty, please forgive him. Please forgive him. Grand Preceptor is old and muddled. It is not worth your majesty lowering yourself to argue with him. One might have expected Tu Lung to fly into a rage, but instead she only sat there calmly, propping up her chin as she watched with a smile. Seeing that, Song Qing thought to himself, Her Majesty is smiling in anger. Let me apologize to Her Majesty in his place. But in truth, Tu Lung was not angry at all. She was thinking about the Imperial Tutor's actions. If anyone knew that the Imperial Tutor had cast aside all worldly propriety and hidden an entire room full of paintings of me, she remembered entering that room in a red dress. or the time she carried a wine jar in her hand, stumbling barefoot through the moonlit night as she approached the portrait of herself as a child. Tu Lung gently touched it, gazing at it in fascination before squeezing her eyes shut to feel it, then took a deep swig of wine. If Sir knew that the me I am now is not the me he remembers. Meanwhile, outside the city under the bright moonlit night, the Imperial Tutors group had returned. Entering the city under his orders, they split into small groups and slipped in silently. Do not alert anyone. His subordinates followed after him. In another scene, the maid traveling with the state preceptor asked curiously, "My lord, you offended the great immortal of the Go clan. How do you still dare to return to the capital?" At the question, Li Zhongxing awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck and stammered. This poor Taoist had no choice. That old monster marked me when I was breaking out of the cocoon. Now, in all the world, the only safe places are the Divine Palace on Mount Jiui or at the Imperial Tutor's side. Before that old monster finds me, this poor Taoist must reshape this body and wipe away the mark on it. As he spoke, he rubbed at his neck, where streaks of light suddenly appeared and slowly began to fade. As for Danjua, after entering the city, he slipped through a window into a room. He looked somewhat disheveled because of his wounds. Danjua took out the pearls he had brought back from inside his robe and gazed at them intently, cradling them in both hands. "I only hope this thing is as the state preceptor said and can suppress the goo inside Her Majesty's body for 7 days." At that very moment, he suddenly spun around in shock at the loud noise behind him. A girl, swaying slightly, approached him with a wine jar in her hand. It was Tu Lung. Danjua looked somewhat flustered. "Along, do you already know everything?" Immediately, he dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty, your servant deserves 10,000 deaths." One might have expected Tu Lung to be furious, but instead she wore a dazed expression, her cheeks flushed red, then let out a belch, while Danjua remained kneeling with his head bowed. Tu Lung only smiled, speaking as she began to remove her clothes. "How rare. In my dream, Sir, when he's serious and careful, really does have another, more alluring side." She moved closer to the Imperial Tutor. Only then did Danjua look up at her, and he froze, his own cheeks flushing red. "Is this a dream?" Tu Lung stepped closer, drew out an acupuncture needle, and licked her lips as she asked, "You want me to spare you, sir? Fine. I want you to beg me with your body." As she spoke, Tu Lung lifted his chin with both hands and kissed him hard. And so everything followed naturally. Tu Lung's clothes were gradually stripped away. In the quiet room, only the sound of their breathing could be heard. After a while, Danjua moved lower along her body, making Tu Lung frown and cry out, "It hurts." Then the final piece of cloth came off as well. That night passed in a way Danjua could never forget. The scent of wine on her body was so sweet. Now, I've become just like Her Majesty. I, too, am about to be drunk to death. The two of them clung tightly to each other, entwined together. Inside him, it was as if he had split into two selves. One side insisted that a gentleman must keep proper restraint, that morality could not be abandoned. "Danjua, all those years you spent reading the teachings of sages, how could you tempt an innocent young girl like Her Majesty?" But the other side laid bare his desire. When a flower blooms, it should be picked. Besides, this time Her Majesty took the initiative. What's more, this is only a dream. If it weren't a dream, how could Her Majesty behave like this? "Your Majesty, Alung." He had thought he would go on wavering forever, but then a deafening clap of thunder jolted him awake. "Your Majesty, absolutely not." The Imperial Tutor, who had been lying alone in his room, suddenly sat up. Pressing one hand to his forehead, he looked exhausted. So, it had only been a nightmare. Thank goodness. This cannot continue. It is time to make a decision. Elsewhere outside, the sky was still pitch black. In her chamber, the Empress still held a wine jug in her hand, looking dazed and deep in thought. Suddenly, the great immortal appeared, eyes sparkling at the sight of the wine jug. "You're back already?" The Empress still looked as though she were drowning in her own thoughts. If I explained it that way just now, would he really believe it was only a dream? She crossed her arms in frustration. Who would have thought the Imperial Tutor would return to the capital tonight? But I still haven't figured it out. How am I supposed to face his feelings? "Why are you alone?" Outside, the rain had already begun pouring down. The Empress Dowager was seated at a banquet with Lord Zhao when one of her subordinates came in to report. "Reporting to your highness, Lord Chun and Lord Gao have both sent word that they have no time and will not be able to make it." Hearing this, the Empress Dowager's eyes reddened with sorrow. "They've all been so busy lately." The subordinate replied, "Reporting to your highness, Lord Gao is occupied with flood control." Thinking of how all the ministers were busy directing public works, he tried to encourage them. "Keep your spirits up. In the future, when history is written, your names will be in it as well. Lord Chun is busy dealing with the locust plague. I merely wanted to see the first empress in the history of..." But then this disaster fell right onto our heads. Thinking of that, Lord Zhao asked irritably, "What about Lord Gu? Why isn't he here either?" The palace maid answered, reporting to Lord Zhao, "Lord Gu is not busy." But Lord Zhao then stroked his chin and guessed, "I'm the one freeloading here. Since they're not coming, I should at least cooperate with them a little." He let out an angry sigh. That bunch of unreliable people. It's only been a few days, and they've already become half-hearted toward the Empress Dowager. Thinking of how the other court officials were all tied up with work, while the task of accompanying the Empress Dowager at dinner had fallen on him, Lord Zhao grew more annoyed. But then he thought it over again. It's only been a few days, and they've already become half-hearted toward the Empress Dowager. Ever since the imperial tutor was stripped of his post for a time, Your Majesty has come to rely more on those ministers. If one eats the ruler's grain, should one not be loyal to the ruler? After that, the two of them began their meal. The Empress Dowager picked up her chopsticks and said with a smile, "Zhao Ano, Uncle Tang. Fortunately, tonight I still have you to enjoy these delicacies with me." Lord Zhao answered respectfully, "Your Highness, the Empress Dowager." He had barely begun when she interrupted him. "There are no outsiders here. Uncle Tang, just as before, call me 14th Lady." Then she picked out some food for him. "This dish is good. This one is delicious too. Hurry and try them, Uncle Tang." Lord Zhao, however, still looked tense. "Your Highness need not serve me. This subject has already made arrangements. Let them have a taste of the sweetness of power first, and then have it snatched away from them again. Naturally, when that time comes, they will still have to return to your Highness and form an alliance." At this, the Empress Dowager's expression changed. Lord Zhao, his voice sharp and forceful, stabbed straight through the morsel with his chopsticks. "The Empress is nothing more than the daughter of a musician, low-born by status. For a woman to seize power, what a disgrace." Outside, the rain still fell heavily. Court officials holding umbrellas went back and forth. "Greetings, Lord Li." "Good morning. Good morning." In the distance came the muttering voice of Lord Zhao. He was reading over a memorial in his hands. "Very good. This is exactly how it should be written." Hearing that, Lord Gao brightened at once. "You flatter me, my lord. The rain disaster struck suddenly last night, and all at once I felt inspired. I had already gone to bed, but then got back up to revise it." After reading the memorial, Lord Zhao said to him, "At court later, I've already arranged for the others to report on the changing situation at the border first." He even draped an arm over the man's shoulder in seeming intimacy. "When the time comes, work with me. Persuade His Majesty to send the imperial tutor to guard the frontier. If we can get him out of the capital, I can seize the capital and the surrounding region while taking advantage of the opportunity." But little did he know, every word had already been overheard by the imperial tutor standing behind them. He stared at them and spoke coldly. "Oh." The two men were instantly terrified. Their eyes bulged and their mouths dropped open. "Imperial tutor, why you? Weren't you confined to your residence?" The imperial tutor's face was frosty as he demanded in a low voice, "The one His Majesty confined is me, the imperial tutor. What does that have to do with my post as great general of the state?" The two of them went pale with fright and shrank back, inwardly wondering, it can work like that? Later, at court, the imperial tutor stood among the officials and reported before the Empress. "Your Majesty, a secret letter has arrived from Northern Anai." Wearing her dragon robe, the Empress looked startled and ordered, "Present it." Then the imperial tutor and Song Qing handed it over to her. It read, "The state of Tang has seen that we and Dai Ung have only just enthroned a new sovereign, and that our authority is not yet stable. Therefore, it has incited the surrounding minor states to attack Dai Ung. 7 days ago, Tang took the lead in mobilizing a coalition army of 300,000, advancing straight toward Shanghai Pass and massing troops at the gate." The imperial tutor pointed at the map, then folded it shut with a grave look. "This allied army has delivered a declaration of war to Dai Ung." But after Song Qing took the letter and read it, he was horrified. This, he read aloud in shock. "A woman usurps her husband's rule. The world cannot tolerate it. Today we form an alliance. 300,000 troops are willing to hunt together with General Dan at Shanghai Pass and decide victory or defeat. As soon as the Empress heard this, a dark chill seemed to spread around her, leaving the officials below not daring to utter a word. They dared insult the imperial tutor's disciple right in front of him. Was this really something they were hearing with their own ears? The Empress then frowned and sighed. I understand. Then what do my beloved ministers think? Should we fight or seek peace? The officials exchanged awkward glances. How arrogant. They dare mock the sovereign of our court for being a woman. Lord Zhao immediately shouted, "Who says women are inferior to men? Fight! We must fight them. The dignity of all Dai cannot be humiliated by a few neighboring petty states." Seeing this, Lord Gao behind him had to grab his shoulder to stop him. "Calm down, my lord. My lord, that's not what you told this official at first. All the effort we put into that memorial was wasted." At that moment, the imperial tutor, standing beside the Empress, respectfully offered his opinion. "Your Majesty, this subject is willing to lead the troops into battle and defend your Majesty's honor." But the Empress remained silent, her gaze distant and unreadable. Then she frowned and said, "I do not doubt my minister's determination to defend my honor. If our court can provide provisions for the soldiers, why would we not fight? But if the common people are short of money and goods, then I can endure a little humiliation. Seeking peace would be the better course." Thinking of the people suffering hunger and hardship because of war, she said, "To put a stop to war, a true general should not delight in battle or be eager for great exploits." Minister of Revenue. At the sound of his title, he jumped in alarm. "Why, yes, this official is here. In reply to your Majesty, ever since the grain transfer reforms, our court has not made tribute payments to the Divine Palace for a full 20 years. The Minister of Revenue, the official in charge of the state's finances, reported from the documents in his hands. Although natural disasters and fires have occurred frequently, no region has been left unaided. The people are prosperous. The granaries are full, and taxes have been paid on time. The imperial tutor has also paid taxes in full." This made the Empress wonder aloud. "Imperial tutor, would you even hand over yourself and your whole household to me?" Seeing the slight redness in the Empress's eyes, the imperial tutor stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the treasury of Dai has been abundantly supplied for 100 years. Then the Minister of Revenue declared with utter coolness, "If your Majesty wishes to fight, then we fight." Along with him, all the officials spoke in unison. "We subjects all support your Majesty." At that, the Empress smiled faintly, her eyes full of challenge, inner force seeming to radiate from her as she said, "If all my ministers support it, then I have decided. I shall personally lead the army." All the officials were very satisfied with the decision. Only Lord Zhao felt a slight tremor in his heart. Looking up at the Empress's bearing, he thought she resembled the late Emperor very much. Truly worthy of being the late Emperor's bloodline. She had some of his style indeed. "Your Majesty is like a man. Your Majesty is like a man." News of the Empress quickly reached the Empress Dowager's ears. In the curtained chamber of her residence, a subordinate came to report. After hearing it, the Empress Dowager was astonished. These words were truly spoken by His Majesty herself. The subordinate immediately answered, "Reporting to your Highness, when His Majesty declared that she would personally lead the troops into battle, even the imperial tutor was shocked. It does not seem the two of them had discussed it beforehand." Also, Lord Zhao said. Before he could finish, the Empress Dowager cut him off. "He won't come again." Before the man could complete his sentence, she had already guessed the matter, leaving him utterly stunned. "Why, your Highness? How did you know?" The Empress Dowager looked pensive, staring intently at the letter in her hand. The late emperor once said, "A sovereign should take the people's worries as his own worries, and the people's joy as his own joy." The way His Majesty has acted this time truly does resemble the late emperor in some ways. The subordinate grew anxious. "Then what should we do now?" "Even Lord Zhao has abandoned your Highness. And with Chief Steward Song there, our people cannot get into the imperial study. How are we supposed to gather intelligence on His Majesty and the imperial tutor from now on?" One would have thought the Empress Dowager would be flustered with no one left behind her, but instead she calmly lifted her teacup, her face reflected clearly on its surface. "It's fine. I made plans early on. According to the laws of Daiyang, an illicit affair between master and disciple is no different from incest between father and child. She was convinced that the imperial tutor and the empress were carrying on in secret. If the ruler of a nation takes the lead in such immoral, taboo behavior, then Daeung's moral order and the education of its people will be destroyed in a single day. There will certainly be a good show to watch. The moment the words left her mouth, the Empress Dowager's eyes suddenly widened in astonishment. One might have thought she feared she had misspoken, but instead she hurriedly ordered, "Bring brush, ink, paper, and inkstone at once." The words are suddenly pouring out of me like a spring. Then the Empress Dowager went wild, painting scenes on paper of the imperial tutor and the Empress being intimate and affectionate. Excellent. At last, Volume 2 of the Imperial Tutor and the Supreme Empress has found its inspiration. The subordinate at her side eagerly chimed in. "Once your Highness makes a move, how could it not be brilliant? The title of best-selling champion at Yongshu Hall will surely belong to our Empress Dowager." That night, the moon rose high in the dark sky, and voices could be heard from inside the residence courtyard. "Your Majesty, regarding epidemic prevention after the disaster in Shu Prefecture, the officials and people of Qing Prefecture have already achieved initial results in catching the locusts. This subject has also calculated the grain and supplies that must be sent to Northern Anai. I ask your Majesty to approve it." In the solemn room, the imperial tutor stood there stiffly, watching Song Qing cling to him. "Imperial tutor, you finally returned to the capital. While you were gone, His Majesty was buried in endless affairs every single day, so busy she didn't even have time to read the book she loves." Song Qing spoke in a tone full of pity. "His Majesty is only a 15-year-old girl, yet she pushes herself so hard, up earlier than a rooster, asleep later than a dog, and now she even has to go out and fight and kill." Hearing this, the imperial tutor froze, his eyes full of concern. "Recently, has your Majesty been fainting again?" He had not even finished speaking when the Empress appeared behind Song Qing. No one in this world lives more easily than anyone else. Walking over with 2 books in her hands, the Empress said, as the sovereign of a nation, "It is only natural that I bear the affairs of Dai on day and night." At that moment, afraid of being punished for what he had just said, Song Qing hurriedly changed the subject and then scampered off. "Has your Majesty finished with her work? Then this subject will go prepare the meal." The Empress paid it no mind. She walked up before the imperial tutor and said gently, "I've kept you waiting, imperial tutor. Stay and dine with me tonight. We can talk while we eat." But standing before the Empress, the imperial tutor suddenly grew strangely silent. The Empress froze and looked at him with wide eyes, a faint blush rising on her cheeks, while a trace of grievance lingered in his eyes. Then the 2 of them quickly turned away, neither looking at the other. That night, by the lotus pond, the scene was dreamlike and radiant. In the pavilion glowing against the dark night, 2 figures sat together. The great immortal sat nearby, popping candy into their mouth and exclaiming, "This is so entertaining." Seeing this, Song Qing hurriedly reminded them, "Great immortal, don't embarrass us too much." It turned out these 2 were spying on the other pair. "Lord Imperial Tutor, work up some passion. As long as His Majesty gets pregnant, then before she goes to war, she won't have to go to the battlefield anymore." In that romantic setting, the imperial tutor handed the jade bracelet back to the Empress. She took it from him and examined it with puzzled curiosity. "What is this?" The imperial tutor smiled and said, "Hasn't your Majesty been fainting often lately? This bracelet contains the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the essence of sun and moon. It can protect your life and health, free of illness, free of worry." Hearing that, the Empress froze, finally understanding. "So this is why you suddenly went to the frontier?" So the imperial tutor risked danger and fought those enormous, terrifying beasts for this. One would think the imperial tutor would be pleased that the Empress understood his intentions, but instead he stiffened, his eyes full of unspoken thoughts. The Empress, meanwhile, looked slightly flustered, because, remembering her previous world, she thought, in the past, what I hated most was the way men could be both devoted and cruel. But now I want to love him, cherish him, even kill him. Just like that, the 2 of them tangled together on the flower-strewn red carpet. Better to hide him away. Only when a man's life ends at the moment he loves the most can he remain loyal forever. Only then can I trust him forever. As the Empress lightly touched his sleeping face, she thought, "This is the lesson I learned with blood and bone in one whole lifetime." Back in the present, she felt the pulse in her own wrist. "But I cannot do that to the imperial tutor. I have no right to do that. Looking at the imperial tutor's manner and sincerity, the empress felt sorrowful, because I'm not even the Tu Lung in his memories. Regret filled her gaze. Then the empress clutched the bracelet tightly to the left side of her chest. She had nearly forgotten she was standing right in front of the imperial tutor. Seeing this, he too looked somewhat surprised. Holding a cup of tea in his hand, he asked gently, "By the way, how does your majesty know about the strange beasts at the frontier?" Only then did the empress come back to herself. Flustered and uneasy, she said, "I asked the regent minister." "No, that's not right. Unexpectedly, this time she had let something slip. "Have I exposed myself?" Just as expected, the imperial tutor frowned suspiciously at her. The empress thought, was I not supposed to know about the frontier? In the warm, cozy room, she sat before the imperial tutor, flustered by his suspicion. Her face tightened with distress. Clearly, I can think of countless excuses. As she thought this, her hands clenched tightly beneath the table. But I did not want to lie to the imperial tutor. The empress struggled with these thoughts, then suddenly raised her voice. "Imperial tutor." The imperial tutor did not startle. He remained silent, thoughtful, waiting for her answer. The empress gathered all her courage and was about to speak, but when she met his sincere eyes, she faltered. Looking at him with sorrowful eyes, she thought, once he knows I am not the Tu Lung from before, will the imperial tutor still treat me as he once did, caring for me regardless of everything? The image of the imperial tutor was reflected in her shimmering eyes as her thoughts drifted. Unexpectedly, the imperial tutor suddenly dropped to his knees before her and shouted, This subject begs your majesty for punishment." The empress, who had been flustered, now turned completely astonished, her eyes wide with confusion. At once, the imperial tutor lowered his head in remorse. "That is exactly what happened. On the night before your majesty's enthronement ceremony, I had originally intended to tell you everything about the ghost debate from 20 years ago and about the blockade of the southern frontier and the late emperor. But that day in the room, the imperial tutor was showing Tu Lung a book he had just opened, and Tu Lung froze in shock. A terrifying beast frightened Tu Lung into tears. Your Majesty had only read one page of the compendium of strange beasts of the southern frontier and was scared into crying. After that, Tu Lung threw herself at the imperial tutor and said, "Alung doesn't want to be emperor anymore, sir." That night, Your Majesty developed a high fever and remained unconscious for 10 days. The imperial tutor sat by the bedside, anxiously holding her hand. "Alung," the state preceptor said, "you had been struck by the 7-day goo. Your soul left your body and entered another world. Although he could wake you with a forbidden technique, your memories would be damaged." At this point, the imperial tutor closed his eyes in resignation. "Perhaps that was for the best. I saw that after your majesty awoke, although your behavior was still the same as before, you never again mentioned anything about the southern frontier. I assumed you had forgotten that page from the compendium of strange beasts of the southern frontier." Tu Lung fell silent, covering her mouth with one hand as she guessed. "So that's why I couldn't find a single book about the southern frontier in the library tower?" The imperial tutor then recounted what had happened in the study. "That's right. Not long after your majesty's soul returned, I made a special trip to the library tower and put all of them into the dark room. Then the imperial tutor discovered a few books, and he opened them to read. Just then, Tang Tan arrived with Tu Lung and suddenly pushed open the door, calling out, 'Imperial tutor.' Only then did Tu Lung realize, covering her mouth as she secretly laughed. So, Sir was in the library tower that day. But because the imperial tutor, also looking embarrassed, knelt below and said stiffly, 'Yes. Please forgive me, your majesty. To tell the truth, I was not in the capital for more than a month.' Then he stood and walked toward Tu Lung, taking her hand and saying gently, 'Your majesty has done very well. Seeing your majesty strive to be a good emperor, even if I were in the 9 Springs, I could still answer to the late emperor.' Tu Lung froze and looked at his sincerity, thinking, why is Sir saying such strange things today, as if they were his last words? Wait. Tu Lung bent down and pulled open his robes. Sir was injured internally in the southern frontier, wasn't he? At once, she was stunned by the blood-soaked bandages over the wound. Tu Lung gently raised her hand. 'Let me feel it. I can smell blood. To save me, Sir sacrificed 30 years of his life. The Dan family's assets, Tu Lung acted without a word, making the imperial tutor flustered and awkward as he called out, "Your Majesty." But Tu Lung paid no attention, only staring at the wound and gritting her teeth as she thought, "That's right. There's also all the wealth the Dan family has accumulated over these years, all of it added into the treasury." Seeing the anger in Tu Lung's eyes, the imperial tutor was puzzled. "Why is Your Majesty looking at me like that?" Faced with her silent, furious gaze fixed on his wound, the imperial tutor grew uneasy. Sir has given too much for too long. Tu Lung only frowned and thought, should I keep hiding it from him out of my own selfishness? She remembered that year. Beneath the tall green trees, birds flew in the sun. Master Lon was holding a little girl in his arms as she innocently asked, "Master Lon, what is it doing?" Master Lon smiled and explained, "That is a cuckoo. It is born foolish and does not know how to build a nest, so it occupies the magpie's nest as its own home." The little girl stared in surprise. "Isn't that just a cuckoo taking over another bird's nest?" Master Lon then said, with a somewhat sharp look in his eyes, "This is one of the principles heaven and earth use nature to teach us mortals. Do not covet what belongs to others, or heavenly thunder will strike you." Tu Lung, standing behind them, had heard everything. Now she remembered, a cuckoo taking over a nest, struck by heavenly thunder. "Sir has treated me with sincerity, so I, too, want to treat him honestly." Meanwhile, the imperial tutor was still waiting for her answer. Then Tu Lung did not hesitate and told him everything. Actually, the Tu Lung whom Sir has always protected with all his heart died long ago. She forgot the memories of her previous life. Her soul was reborn into another world and lived through an entire lifetime there, even though she was also called Tu Lung. As she spoke, Tu Lung could no longer hold back her tears, and they streamed down her face. But this Tu Lung is not that Tu Lung. She lived to the age of 39. If you want the former Tu Lung to return. Tu Lung wiped away her tears and then cried out like a child, "I am willing to offer up my neck and await execution." She had thought that upon hearing this, the imperial tutor would be angry and grief-stricken. Unexpectedly, he immediately pulled her into his arms and whispered softly in her ear, "I don't mind that at all. In that other world, did Your Majesty live well? Without Sir by your side?" Then, unable to contain himself, he held Tu Lung even tighter and said, "But it must have been very hard, mustn't it? You only lived to 39. It is Sir's fault. In this lifetime, I could not protect you completely." With tear-filled eyes, Tu Lung looked at the imperial tutor in confusion. Then she burst into tears and clung tightly to him. At that moment, the imperial tutor thought back. Since childhood, there had been nothing that made him afraid. Your Majesty is still a child at heart, yet all these years, you have never cried even once. The imperial tutor looked at Tu Lung with sincere eyes. Until today, she had finally met someone willing to make her smile. In the solemn palace of the Empress Dowager, with two attendants standing beside her, the Empress Dowager was seated, sketching something. She then set down her brush, lifted the painting, and flourished it excitedly. What a delightful, forbidden romance between master and disciple. Heart to heart and body to body. In the painting, a man and a woman representing the imperial tutor and Tu Lung were holding hands tightly. She was calling Sir, while the imperial tutor softly answered, "Your Majesty." Meanwhile, the Empress Dowager rested her chin on her hand. So moved she nearly cried, wondering when Ingluo Manor would finally be able to openly publish the assault version written by her own hand. The two attendants behind her stared at the painting in shock. "Your Highness, this isn't it a bit too obvious?" The attendant beside her immediately cut in. "Not at all. This will definitely make people's eyes ache from staring. Your Highness, the mistress of Winyu Hall has returned. She repeatedly instructed this servant to tell you this." Just then, another lady nearby, holding the painting, said upon hearing Winyu Hall mentioned, "Winyu Hall is a perfectly proper bookstore, and business is not easy. But this volume, with the imperial tutor above, where has the female emperor run off to, has once again received a huge order from customer. They asked this young lady to come back and urge your household's writer. It absolutely must include sounds of slaps wedged between the plot scenes. The Empress Dowager pondered for a moment, then waved it off. Who cares what she likes? This is the pride that comes with being the sales champion. As long as the customer is happy to spend silver, that's enough. Then she suddenly remembered, that's right, the imperial tutor has not entered the palace for a long time. Tonight, His Majesty will surely hold a banquet at Furon Pavilion to receive him. In the past, the imperial tutor was always shallow-minded. Every time he accompanied His Majesty at a banquet, he would stay the night at Fengrue Hall. Thinking of this, the Empress Dowager's face filled with scheming delight as she chuckled to herself. Just in time, she wanted to make a personal appearance. Then she sat before the mirror and dressed herself up, ordering, I shall play the role of a scheming supporting woman and test one of the old tropes from the books. Ah no, when it comes to master and disciple, it should be called sentiment. The attendant behind her stared in surprise. Your Highness truly wants to remove this powerful makeup? The Empress Dowager said calmly, of course. As she spoke, she lined her eyes more deeply. Normally, I do not use that old face to receive the court officials. It is to appear more imposing. Then she added a few more hairpins. A moment later, she turned and asked, well, can I pass with this look? At that moment, the Empress Dowager looked like a newly selected beauty, causing both attendants to blurt out, exquisitely beautiful, so lovely that everyone would be captivated. The imperial tutor couldn't possibly remain unmoved. She had seemed likely to be pleased by that. Yet instead, the Empress Dowager flew into a rage. Absolutely not. If he really is moved, then I would have to rewrite the book. At once, one attendant covered the other's mouth. Take those words back. Never say that again. Then the Empress Dowager, dressed in pure white and holding a dainty fan over her mouth, departed. That's more like it. Come, gather the good stuff and collect material. Elsewhere, in the quiet of the night, the lotus pond no longer glimmered with that dim light. The imperial tutor was carrying Tu Lung in his arms. Tu Lung's eyes were tightly shut, but they were still wet with tears. On the other side, Tang Tan and the great immortal were peering through a spyglass and saying with satisfaction, excellent. But then they were stunned to see 3 people beneath the trees, bent over and drawing something. Judging by the ink lines on the paper, it was an intimate image of Tu Lung and the imperial tutor. The Empress Dowager was using an attendant's back as a drawing table, licking her lips as she sketched and muttering, instinct. It's all instinct. Tang Tan curiously approached from behind. The great immortal immediately said, it's the Empress Dowager. But Tang Tan simply rubbed his chin and said curiously, this brushwork, these lines, I feel like I've seen them somewhere before. When he saw the outrageous contents of the drawing, Tang Tan was so shocked that he snatched the paper away. Only then did the Empress Dowager look up in panic and shriek. Chief Steward Tang. Tang Tan, however, only recognized that the person in the middle holding the brush was someone he had never met before, while the 2 people beside her were the Empress Dowager's #1 palace maids. At that moment, the Empress Dowager had gone pale with fright. Heavens, if anyone learned that those paintings were drawn by me, then my position as Empress Dowager of Dai would be threatened. Unexpectedly, Tang Tan broke into a silly smile, then knelt and held the painting up before the young woman he had never seen before. Are you also a little palace maid serving by the Empress Dowager's side? Your imitation of Mr. Tuesday's painting style is pretty similar. Frightened, the Empress Dowager covered herself and asked stiffly, why you? What do you mean by that? Tang Tan then asked, would you like to earn some extra money? Hearing this, the Empress Dowager stared at him blankly. Tang Tan turned away, thinking cleverly to himself, Mr. Tuesday's paintings are truly expensive, and Dai Young is about to go to war. I have to help His Majesty save money. Elsewhere, in that magnificent residence, Tu Lung had fallen fast asleep. The imperial tutor carried her to the bed, then sat beside her, gazing at her intently. After a while he stood and turned to leave, but suddenly stopped when a hand tugged at his robe. Tu Lung opened her eyes and looked at him pleadingly. Sir, don't go. Stay and talk with me, all right? There is still much about this world that I do not understand. I want to ask Sir for guidance. The imperial tutor was silent for a moment, then moved closer, sat by the bed, and replied, very well. In a warm room, the imperial tutor sat by Tu Lung's bedside, and the 2 gazed at each other deeply. While Tu Lung sat dazed, clutching the edge of the blanket tightly, the imperial tutor spoke. By the way, Your Majesty, this item needs blood to acknowledge its master. Blood from the heart would be best. Tu Lung immediately widened her eyes in surprise. Blood from the heart? The imperial tutor smiled tenderly, stroking her hair. That's right, but your majesty has always feared pain the most, so the fingertip will do. Hearing that, Tu Lung was so startled that she sat upright at once. Then, since Sir has given me a gift, Sir should help me put on. As she spoke, she raised a wrist bearing the bracelet. The imperial tutor gently lifted that soft hand. Then pardon my offense. At that moment, the imperial tutor looked grave and thoughtful as he stared at her hand, thinking, restrain yourself, Dan Dansha. Then he used a needle to prick Tu Lung's fingertip. Blood dripped out, and magical instruments began to surround the two of them. Tu Lung looked a little flustered. Rubbing her forehead with one hand, she frowned and cried, my forehead. The imperial tutor immediately soothed her. Do not be afraid, your majesty. This is the spirit flower contained within the bamboo pill. It has already flowed to the center of your majesty's forehead. There a golden mark was carved. Tu Lung then noticed that the bracelet on her wrist had vanished. The bracelet disappeared too? The imperial tutor rubbed his chin and smiled. Tang Tom will be able to slack off a little in secret from now on. He won't have to help your majesty paint the flower anymore. Hearing that, Tu Lung became delighted, her face full of excitement as she asked, really? Pointing at her forehead, she asked, what shape is this golden mark? Sir thinks it is beautiful too, doesn't he? Suddenly, the imperial tutor froze, thinking, in that other world where I lived, only men painted flowers on their foreheads. While he was still dazed, Tu Lung said excitedly, but Tang Tan said the shape of this flower is the shape of the Taiping flower that Sir likes best. The imperial tutor was quiet for a moment before answering yes. I am devoted only to the Taiping flower. The imperial tutor recalled that year on the Rocky Mountain. He was practicing swordsmanship, while beside him little Tu Lung innocently read poetry. Fusang blooms from astonishing splendor. White-headed flowers rank as the foremost blossom. Golden pikes and silver skies honor only the Taiping flower. Holding a book in her hand, Tu Lung said, this poem is taken from Taiping flower. Sir, did you really write this poem? Do you really like the Taiping flower? Sometime later, the imperial tutor had grown into a majestic, commanding man as he stood before the emperor. Your majesty, as long as the Dan clan has not fallen, Dai will not perish. The Dan family still has me. Even if my entire clan dies, I will still drive the allied armies of the 7 states out of Daejeon. As he recalled it now, the imperial tutor only smiled. Your majesty need not pay attention to my preferences. A person born beautiful would look lovely no matter what flower-shaped mark was carved on her forehead. It's a pity there is no mirror. Hearing the imperial tutor say this, Tu Lung's heart skipped a beat. She reached out and pinched the imperial tutor's cheeks like a child, while he still looked faintly regretful. That's right, she had just been about to speak when suddenly their eyes met at close range. Both of them could only shyly lose themselves in each other's gaze. Their breaths were so close they nearly touched. Tu Lung held the back of his neck with one hand and said, don't move. I will borrow your eyes to look. In the imperial tutor's sincere eyes, there was nothing but Tu Lung. So this is the marks are carved onto me. As she spoke, Tu Lung touched the mark lightly with delight. I like it very much. Suddenly she paused, her face blank with realization. Right? Elong still wants to ask Sir about something. At once, she pulled the imperial tutor closer and pressed him down onto the bed, bracing both hands on either side of him as she teased, Sir, how exactly is this ZZE supposed to be used? In the dream, Tu Lung asked with sorrowful eyes, Sir, just how is this ZZE used? In return, she received only one answer. Your Majesty, I am sorry. At that moment, dazzling sunlight from outside streamed into the room. Tu Lung sat up wearily, frowning as she rubbed her aching body. I can't believe that in 2 lifetimes, the first time I ever took the initiative to seduce a man, he actually dared refuse me, and even used a dagger to knock me unconscious. While she was still drowsy, Tang Tan came rushing over from nowhere in a panic. Your Majesty, this is bad. The imperial tutor mobilized troops throughout the night. The army is now assembled at the drill ground, ready to fight at any time on your Majesty's command. At the command platform, with the white tower below the ancient yellow maples, the imperial tutor rode up to Tu Lung, his face equally troubled, and called out, Your Majesty, At that moment, Tu Lung, still in her sleeping clothes, came rushing out and shouted, "Lord Imperial Tutor, your military authority is truly formidable. Without the Tiger Tally, without my imperial decree, you can still mobilize troops as you please. If you had even the slightest ambition to rebel, I would be nothing more than fish on the chopping block." The Imperial Tutor could only clasp his hands and placate her. "Please calm your Majesty's anger. I would not dare." But unexpectedly, Tu Lung flared up, glaring furiously as she pointed at him and shouted, "What is there that you would not dare do? On the last trip to the southern frontier, you abandoned your post without a word of farewell. And this time you." Seeing that Tu Lung was truly furious, the Imperial Tutor immediately knelt before her and said calmly, "Your Majesty, I guarantee this will be the last time I act on my own. This time, I will sweep away the foreign invaders for your Majesty and guard the frontier. Your Majesty need only remain in the Imperial Palace and wait for news of victory." He had thought that after hearing this, Tu Lung would calm down. Unexpectedly, she became even more furious. She shouted Danju's name right to his face, then glared at him, grabbed his collar, and said, "You already know my greatest secret, and yet you still refuse to become my man? Do you think I'm stupid enough to let a tiger return to the mountains?" Even facing His Majesty's rage, Danjur remained very calm as he explained, "Your Majesty, of the Dan clan, only this subject remains. The family fortune, the tiger tally, the seals. I've already handed over everything. I can swear to heaven that for the rest of my life, I will never step into the capital and I will never rebel. If one day I die in battle, all of the Dan family's troops will come under your Majesty's command. Your Majesty may sleep soundly without a single worry." Hearing those words, Tu Lung's heart seemed to miss a beat. But then she clenched her hands and cried out, "But you're the only one I want. It's obvious that I am in your heart, and my heart is turned toward you too. Then why did you reject me last night?" As she spoke, Tu Lung gripped both of Danju's shoulders tightly. He looked somewhat flustered and answered hesitantly, "Your Majesty, it is not that this subject is unwilling, but that I cannot." At that, Tu Lung's eyes grew faintly sorrowful. Gazing into the distance, she asked in a regretful voice, "If the person last night had been the old Along, would you have accepted her?" At once, Danju stood up, seized her wrist, and looked straight into her eyes. "Then I too would like to ask Along something. If I had stayed last night, were you planning to make me your imperial consort?" Faced with such seriousness, Tu Lung grew awkward again and turned away to avoid his gaze. Daeung governs the country by law and educates the people through virtue. As ruler of a nation, I must naturally serve as an example for the people, obey the law, live uprightly, and devote myself to the state. Then Tu Lung lowered her head, looking guilty as she stammered, "I could only wrong you, teacher." Danju did not seem surprised at all. Rather than looking sad, he placed one hand on her shoulder as if to comfort her. "Exactly. Although your Majesty holds this subject in your heart, you cannot cast aside morality and proper order for my sake and marry your own teacher as imperial consort. Is that not so?" Only then did Tu Lung's face relax a little as she said, "Yes. And although teacher admires me, you are likewise unwilling to become a nameless, titleless man for my sake, without authority, never appearing in public. Is that not so?" Right after that, the Imperial Tutor took Tu Lung's soft hand and gently pressed it to his lips, closing his eyes as if to feel it. Then, with sincere eyes and a gentle voice, he said, "Yes, teacher is unwilling. Your Majesty holds this subject in your heart. That alone gives this subject some joy. But if your Majesty can set aside personal feelings and place the affairs of Daeung first, then this subject is truly overjoyed." Before Tu Lung's wide-eyed, bewildered stare, Danju gently brushed aside a strand of her hair and reminded her, "This is also the final lesson teacher wishes to teach Along. One who holds a high position in court should devote herself wholeheartedly to all under heaven, be upright, just, and incorruptible." The two of them stood side by side at height, looking down over the city below, beneath trees shedding golden leaves. 3 years later, On a winter night with heavy falling snow, a soldier rushed breathlessly before the court and reported. Urgent report. Victory dispatch from 800 li away in northern Ung. At that moment, Tu Lung was seated on the throne in dragon robes. Before her, the assembled officials all spoke in unison. Congratulations, Your Majesty. Congratulations, Your Majesty. Thanks to Your Majesty's blessings, Northern Ung has sent continuous reports of victory. The enemy, upon hearing the news, has already fled. Resting her chin on one hand, Tu Lung gave an order. Tang Tan, summon the military courier into the hall. I want to hear the latest news of teacher. The courier entered the hall and reported, replying to Your Majesty. Before setting out, General Dan led everyone to help the local households store supplies and bring in the rice harvest. Your Majesty, General Dan is truly heroic. He can gnaw on steam buns while letting the military physician remove poison from his body. The other generals all have family members accompanying them, but only General Dan does not. He also has no amusements whatsoever. We all worry that too much suppression may harm his health. D'Angelo looked rather exhausted, wiping away sweat stiffly with one hand, his expression uncomfortable. The general's old wounds have not yet healed, and he has already suffered new ones. I ask Your Majesty to send several more skilled military physicians to Northern Ung. Tu Lung said evenly, Tang Tan, write that down for me. Standing at her side, Tang Tan obeyed at once. This servant understands, Your Majesty. But just as they were hearing good news, a loud cry